Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn as Zeref's brother and fell in love with Mavis Vermillion? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived Twice. The sunlight that filtered through the forest canopy was a soft, dappled gold, painting shifting patterns on the mossy ground. It was the kind of quiet, perfect afternoon that felt like it could stretch into eternity. A young boy with hair the color of that same sun sat cross-legged in a small clearing, his brow furrowed in concentration. His name was Orion, a small, perfect sphere of golden light, warm and humming with a gentle energy, hovered between his palms. It pulsed in time with his heartbeat, a miniature sun born of his own will. "You're getting better, Ari," a calm voice observed. Orion's concentration shattered. The sphere of light flickered and dissolved into glittering motes that danced in the air for a moment before vanishing. He looked up, a pout already forming on his lips. His older brother, Zeref, leaned against an ancient oak, a thick, leather-bound book held loosely in one hand. Zeref's dark hair was a stark contrast to Orion's own, and his eyes, though just as dark, held a quiet, studious depth that always made him seem older than his years. "I almost had it stable," Orion complained, scrambling to his feet. "You distracted me, Zeref." Zeref offered a small, rare smile. A true mage must be able to hold his focus through any distraction. "What if a squirrel had chattered? Or the wind had blown? Would you surrender your spell to them as well?" "A squirrel is one thing," Orion huffed, brushing dirt from his trousers. "An annoying older brother is another thing entirely." He broke into a grin, his frustration melting away as quickly as it had come. He couldn't stay mad at Zeref. It was like trying to be angry at the moon for being in the sky. He flopped down on the grass beside his brother, craning his neck to see the title of the book. The script was ancient and complex. "More dusty old history. The origins of magic are never dusty, Orion. They are the foundation upon which we stand," Zeref said, his voice laced with the passion he reserved for learning. "This text speaks of Anksaram, the god of life and death. It posits that all magic is a mere reflection of the power he commands, the power to give and the power to take." Orion wrinkled his nose. It sounded boring. His own magic didn't feel like a reflection of anything. It felt like him. It was the warmth of a hug, the joy of a good meal, the sheer, stubborn refusal to fall down when you tripped. He couldn't put it into words, but he could feel it, a wellspring of boundless energy deep within his soul. Sometimes, in the quiet moments just before sleep, that feeling would bring with it strange, fleeting images. The savory scent of noodle soup, the comforting weight of a heavy orange coat, the ghost of a gruff, rumbling voice that called him, Kit. The images were smoke, dissipating the moment he tried to grasp them, leaving behind a faint ache of a loss he couldn't name. A vibrant blue butterfly with wings like stained glass fluttered past Orion's nose. Instinct took over. He leapt up, laughing, and began to chase it through the clearing, his earlier attempts at magic forgotten. Zeref watched him go, a fond exasperation in his eyes. His brother was a creature of pure impulse, a whirlwind of emotion and energy. Where Zeref sought to understand the world by dissecting its laws and learning its history, Orion seemed to simply experience it. He absorbed it, lived in it, and the world seemed to respond in kind. Flowers bloomed a little brighter where he sat, and small animals, normally shy, would often approach him without fear. Zeref didn't understand his brother's magic, this strange, innate power over life itself, but he cherished it. He cherished him. The chase led Orion deeper into the trees, his laughter echoing through the tranquil woods. Zeref marked his page and closed his book, rising to his feet. "Don't go too far, Ari. Mother will have dinner ready soon." The sound of Orion's joyful shout was his only reply. Zeref shook his head, the smile lingering. In that moment, the world was small, and it was perfect. It was just his books, his village, and his brilliant, impossible brother. The perfection lasted for another 10 minutes. It was the roar that came first. It was not the sound of any normal beast. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, a sound that ripped through the fabric of the peaceful afternoon and tore it to shreds. The birds fell silent. The very air grew heavy, thick with a primal dread. Zeref's blood ran cold. He spun around, his eyes scanning the sky above the village. A shadow fell over them. It was massive, blotting out the sun. A dragon. But it was wrong. Its scales were a sickly, mottled gray, its eyes burned with a mindless, frenzied light, and black veins pulsed across its leathery wings. This was no majestic creature of legend. This was a rabid animal, a force of nature twisted into a weapon of pure destruction. Arian! Zeref screamed, his voice raw with panic. The dragon descended upon their village not with fire, but with a wave of pure kinetic force from a beat of its wings. The sound of splintering wood and shattering stone was punctuated by screams of terror. Zeref didn't hesitate. He ran, faster than he'd ever run in his life, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He burst from the tree line just in time to see the roof of his own home collapse inwards. Mother! Father! Arian came sprinting from the woods, his face pale, the butterfly forgotten. Zeref! What's happening? The dragon landed in the center of the village square, its colossal weight cracking the very earth. It swiped a claw, and a line of homes was reduced to kindling. There was no reason, no purpose to its rampage. It was madness given form. Then, from the wreckage of their home, two figures emerged. Their father, his arm bleeding heavily, was half carrying their mother, who was limping, her face streaked with soot. Zeref! Arian! Run! Their father yelled, his voice strained. Get out of here, now! But the boys were frozen, rooted to the spot by terror. The dragon's malevolent gaze fixed upon the moving figures. It opened its maw, not to breathe fire, but to inhale, drawing in a vortex of air and debris. Their parents didn't stand a chance. They were lifted from their feet, their cries lost in the roaring wind, and pulled into the dragon's gaping mouth. The crunch of bone was sickeningly loud in the sudden silence that followed. Something inside Zeref broke. The world lost all color, all sound. There was only the image of his parents, their loving faces twisted in a final moment of terror. Being devoured by the beast. A cold, hollow emptiness yawned open in his chest, a vacuum that began to pull at everything around him. He felt a power he had only ever read about, a terrifying, ancient magic. Surge up from that empty space. It was cold. It was absolute. I'll kill you, he whispered, his voice trembling not with fear, but with a grief so profound it had curdled into hate. The magic exploded out of him. It was not light or fire or force. It was a wave of pure, unmaking blackness. A contradictory curse. Anxaram's curse. The grass at his feet withered into gray dust. The trees aged 1,000 years in a second, their leaves crumbling, their wood petrifying before collapsing. The very air grew thin and sterile. The wave of death washed over the village, silencing the remaining screams, snuffing out the fires, and leeching the life from everything it touched. The dragon, the source of his pain, turned its maddened gaze upon him. It roared, a challenge to this tiny creature who dared to wield such a foul power. The black energy slammed into it. The beast's roar turned into a shriek of agony. Its sickly gray scales turned to black, cracked, and flaked away like ash. Its flesh decayed, sloughing from its bones in wet chunks. In seconds, the colossal creature of rage was reduced to a mountain of dust and a skeleton that collapsed under its own weight. Its mindless fury finally silenced. Zeref stood in the center of a circle of absolute death, his small body trembling uncontrollably. He had done it. He had avenged his parents. He looked at his hands, horrified. They were smoking with the black energy. He had killed the dragon. But he had also killed the survivors. He had killed the earth. He had killed the very air. Arian had watched the entire thing, paralyzed. He saw the light go out in Zeref's eyes. He felt the life-draining cold of the curse. It was a terrifying void, an antithesis to everything he was. But as the black wave expanded towards him, something else rose up in its place. Not thought, not technique. It was a raw, primal scream from the core of his being. Not him. You can't have him. The wellspring of power inside him didn't just surge, it detonated. A torrent of pure, golden light erupted from Arian, shaping itself into a brilliant, translucent dome. It was the color of the sun, the warmth of the hearth, feeling of life itself given tangible form. The Animus. The black wave of Anxaram's curse crashed against the golden shield of Animus. Death met life. For a terrifying moment, the two forces battled. Black energy sizzled and recoiled where it touched the golden light, unable to drain what was a source of infinite creation. Inside the dome, the dead grass at Orion's feet stirred, then sprouted fresh green shoots. The air was sweet and warm. The curse receded, its source, Zeref, collapsing to his knees, panting, the immediate burst of rage spent. The silence that descended was heavier, more profound than any sound. The village was gone. Their parents were gone. Everything was gone. All that remained were two brothers, separated by a power that defined the very nature of existence. Orion's shield dissolved, his energy spent. He staggered forward, his legs shaking. Zeref didn't look up. He stared at the gray, dead earth around him, then at the perfect circle of vibrant, living green that surrounded Orion. He saw the truth with horrifying clarity. The curse wasn't a tool he could control. It was a part of him now. A poison. Stay back, Zeref rasped, his voice hollow. No, Orion said, tears finally streaming down his face. He took another step. We're together. We have to. Stay back, Zeref screamed, scrambling away from him. He looked at Orion, his eyes wide with a terror that was far worse than the fear the dragon had inspired. It was the terror of himself. I can't. I'll kill you, Ari. This thing, it'll kill you. I can stop it, Orion pleaded, gesturing with his hands, trying to summon the golden light again, but he was too exhausted. My magic, it protected us. I can protect you. You don't understand, Zeref whispered, his face a mask of utter despair. He got to his feet, stumbling backward. I love you more than anything, Orion. That's why I can't be near you. That's why I have to go. Zeref, no, don't leave me, Orion cried, starting to run towards him. Zeref turned and fled, disappearing into the dead, gray woods, his small figure swallowed by the shadows of petrified trees. Orion fell to his knees, his desperate shout echoing in the desolate silence. Zeref. He was alone, utterly and completely alone in the graveyard of his world. The decade that followed was not one of childhood. It was a decade of survival, of memory, and of forging a purpose from the ashes of grief. In the crushing loneliness of the first few years, the smoky fragments of his past life began to coalesce. The name, Naruto Uzumaki, felt as real as Orion Dragneel. He remembered a village of ninjas. The weight of a scratched forehead protector, the faces of his friends, Sakura, Sasuke, Kakashi. He remembered the burden of a tailed beast, the pain of loss, and the unyielding fight for recognition. He was two people in one soul, and the memories of his past life gave him the one thing a grieving child could not have found alone: resolve. He had failed to save a brother once before. He would not fail again. He named his power Animus, for it was the very essence of his soul, the life force he could now command. He trained. He pushed himself past every limit, the whispers of his old sensei, Jiraiya, echoing in his mind. He learned that Animus was not just a shield. He could weave it into threads of light to bind his foes. He could focus it into a concussive blast that could shatter boulders without scorching the grass they sat on. He could coax life from barren soil, mending the wounds of the land. He became strong, his power growing with every passing year, fueled by a singular, unwavering goal: find Zeref, cure him. He followed the whispers, the dark rumors of a boy who could not die, who brought death wherever he walked. He was always one step behind, finding only towns gripped by fear or landscapes blighted by the curse. The trail was cold, a decade long, but it led him across the continent of Ishgar, and finally, to whispers of an island so potent with magic it was considered a holy ground for mages. Tenro Island, a place where the veil between the living world and the source of magic itself was thin. If there was an answer to a divine curse anywhere, it would be there. His small boat cut through the final veil of mist, and the island revealed itself. It was ancient, primal. The trees were impossibly large, their branches forming a canopy that felt like the ceiling of a grand cathedral. The very air hummed, a tangible thrum of etherno that resonated with his own animus, making the life force within him sing. He felt more alive here than he had in 10 years. He beached his boat and ventured inland, letting the unique magical signature of the island guide him. He felt drawn toward its heart, a place where the life energy as so concentrated it felt like standing next to a star. As he pushed through a thicket of ferns, he heard voices. Gruff, angry. He moved silently, his years of travel having honed skills his past life would have been proud of. He peered into a sun-drenched clearing. The scene was bizarre. 5 large, brutish men, all bearing the ugly insignia of the Blue Skull Dark Guild, were menacingly circling a log. And standing on that log, looking utterly unimpressed, was the smallest girl he had ever seen. She couldn't have been much older than he was when his life had fallen apart. Her hair was a waterfall of pale blonde, impossibly long, reaching down to her ankles. She was barefoot, dressed in a simple, frilly tunic, and her large, green eyes held an intelligence and fire that completely belied her size. For the last time, the girl said, her voice clear and firm, with no trace of fear. The Tenro Jade was entrusted to the island's care. It is not a treasure for thugs like you to plunder. Therefore, your presence here is illogical and unwanted. I suggest you leave. The leader, a man with a scarred face and a cruel sneer, laughed. Listen to the little fairy. You think you can order us around? That rock is gonna fetch a high price. Now, hand it over, or we'll just take it off your corpse. The girl sighed, a put-upon sound, as if she were dealing with particularly slow children. Your reasoning is flawed. Firstly, threatening me is a poor tactical choice, as you have no data on my capabilities. Secondly, even if you defeat me, you will never find the jade without my help. It is an exercise in futility. One of the thugs lost his patience and lunged, his hand outstretched to grab her. He never made it. There was no sound, no flash of light. One moment, the man was lunging. The next, Arian was standing between him and the girl, his hand clamped firmly around the man's wrist. The man's forward momentum stopped so abruptly he nearly snapped his own arm. Arian offered a lazy, disarming grin, his blue eyes sparkling with a light that didn't seem entirely friendly. Now, is that any way to treat a lady? He squeezed, and the thug let out a choked gasp of pain, the bones in his wrist grinding together. The other Blue Skull members froze, stunned by his sudden appearance. Arian's presence had shifted the entire dynamic of the clearing. It wasn't just his strength, it was an aura of calm, unshakable confidence that radiated from him. He released the man's wrist, shoving him back into his companions. Arian turned his head slightly, his grin widening as he looked at the tiny, barefoot girl on the log. Her large green eyes were fixed on him, not with fear or relief, but with a sharp, calculating curiosity. He saw a flicker of something in them, a recognition of a fellow outcast, a kindred spirit. Mind if I cut in? Arian asked, his voice casual and warm. It looks like these guys are bothering you. The girl, Mavis Vermillion, tilted her head, a tiny, intrigued smile gracing her lips for the first time. Your intervention is strategically sound, she stated, as if it were a simple fact. But their numbers remain a variable. What is your tactical plan? Arian chuckled. He already liked her. Don't worry, he said, cracking his knuckles. I've got a pretty simple one. He turned his bright, confident gaze back to the scowling mages. It's called, Run Away Before You Get Hurt. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Fairy and the Fox. The 5 Blue Skull mages stared, mouths agape, at the smiling blonde boy who had appeared from thin air. The absolute shock of his arrival was quickly being replaced by the dull, throbbing pain in their compatriot's wrist. The leader, the one with the scarred face, regained his composure first, his expression twisting into a furious snarl. Who the hell are you? He spat, his hand moving to the hilt of the crude broadsword at his hip. Some other treasure hunter. Get lost. This is guild business. Arian's grin didn't falter. My name is Arian, and I'm making it my business. He took a step forward, his posture relaxed, almost lazy. I gave you my tactical plan. It's a good one. You should take it. Tactical plan. I'll show you a tactical plan. Another of the thugs roared, charging forward. He thrust his hands out, and thick, viscous mud erupted from the ground, lurching towards Arian like a hungry beast. Arian didn't even move to dodge. He simply stomped his foot. A pulse of golden animus energy, visible only as a faint shimmer in the air, shot into the earth. The charging wave of mud froze midair. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, Vibrant green shoots sprouted from the mud, blossoming in an instant into a thick, tangled wall of enormous, cheerful-looking sunflowers. The thug crashed first into the impromptu floral barricade with a muffled grunt. The remaining three looked on in disbelief. Before they could process what had happened, Orion moved. He wasn't just fast, he flowed. He ducked under a wild sword swing from the leader, tapping the man's elbow with 2 fingers. A small, contained burst of life energy shot through the man's arm, causing every muscle to seize up in a harmless but completely debilitating cramp. The sword clattered to the ground as the man howled and clutched his now useless limb. The last 2 charged from either side. Orion planted his hands on the ground, kicking his legs up into a handstand. He spun, his legs sweeping out. He didn't make contact. Instead, 2 crescent waves of golden energy shot from the arc of his feet. They weren't blades of wind or fire, they felt solid, alive. They struck the 2 thugs in the chest, not cutting or burning, but impacting with the force of a charging bull. The men flew backward, landing in a heap, the wind knocked completely out of them. Utterly incapacitated but strangely uninjured. The entire fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. Orion flipped back onto his feet, brushing a non-existent speck of dust from his shoulder. He looked at the groaning, tangled mess of blue skull mages, then back at the girl on the log, who had been watching the entire exchange with an unnervingly analytical gaze. "See," Orion said cheerfully. "Simple." Mavis hopped down from the log, her bare feet making no sound on the soft moss. She walked right up to him, her head tilted, her large green eyes scanning him from head to toe. She wasn't looking at him like a savior. She was looking at him like a fascinating, unprecedented puzzle. "Your magic," she stated, her voice crisp and clear. "It is not elemental. It's not a form of takeover or equip. The etherno you manipulate feels generative. It creates, rather than destroys. A highly unusual and versatile application of life force. I have at least 17 questions. What do you call it?" Orion blinked, taken aback by her clinical curiosity. He couldn't help but laugh. "It's called animus. And 17 questions, huh? You don't waste any time. Time is a resource. Wasting it is illogical," she replied simply. She offered a small, sincere smile. "Thank you. My analysis suggested a 73% probability that I could have de-escalated the situation non-violently. But your method was significantly more efficient." "Glad my efficiency meets your standards," he chuckled. "I'm Orion. And you are Mavis Vermillion." Just then, 3 more figures burst into the clearing, weapons drawn. The leader was a tall, handsome young man with spiky blonde hair and a fiery intensity in his eyes. Flanking him were a severe-looking man with long, dark hair, clutching a set of chains, and a lanky, awkward young man with green hair styled into a strange, tree-like shape. "Hold it right there," the blonde one shouted, pointing a finger charged with lightning magic. He saw the defeated Blue Skull members. Then his eyes narrowed on Orion and Mavis. "So, you beat us to them. I suppose you think that gives you first claim on the Tenro Jade." Orion raised an eyebrow. "Tenro Jade? Is that some kind of fancy rock?" "Don't play dumb." The fiery one, Yuri, snapped. "We're the Treasure Hunter Guild, Star Lord, and we've been tracking that jade for months." Mavis stepped between them, holding up a hand. "Peace, Yuri Drayar. Conflict is unnecessary. This is Orion. He assisted me, and as I told these other gentlemen, the Tenro Jade is not a treasure to be claimed." Yuri scoffed. "Says the girl who wants to keep it for herself." The tension in the clearing was thick enough to cut with a knife. Orion could feel the combat prowess of the newcomers. They were skilled. This could get messy. But before he could say anything, Mavis clapped her hands together once, a sharp, definitive sound that drew all eyes to her. "I propose a game," she announced, her eyes sparkling with intellectual mischief. Everyone, including Orion, stared at her. "A contest of wits and perception," she continued, a brilliant smile on her face. "We shall play a game of discovery right here. The rules are simple. I will ask a series of questions about our surroundings, this island. The first person to answer correctly gets a point. The first to 3 points is the winner. The winner gets the undisputed right to be the first to search for the jade, with my guidance." Yuri looked suspicious. The chain wielder, Precht, seemed intrigued, while the tree-haired one, Ward, just looked confused. What's the catch? Yuri asked. No catch, Mavis said brightly. It is a logical method to resolve a dispute without resorting to pointless violence that would only serve to damage this sacred island. Are you afraid you'll lose? That was all it took. Yuri's pride was stoked. Fine, you're on, little fairy. Prepared to be crushed by the genius of Yuri Drayar. Arian found himself grinning. This girl was something else. He gave a slight nod. I'm in. The game that followed was a masterclass in Mavis's unique worldview. The questions were deceptively simple. How many of the trees in this clearing have leaves with 7 points? Which direction is the wind blowing at the very top of the canopy? What is the one creature on this island that does not cast a shadow? Yuri blustered, making bold but incorrect guesses. Precht was methodical, taking his time to count and observe, but Mavis's questions were always a step ahead of his logic. Ward, surprisingly, got one right, noticing the subtle sway of the highest branches. But it was the dynamic between Arian and Mavis that defined the game. Final question, Mavis announced, her eyes twinkling. To win, in this clearing, what is the one thing that does not belong, but is not truly here? Precht scanned the defeated blue skull mages. Them. They don't belong. They are physically present, Mavis countered. Therefore, they are here. Yuri looked around wildly. The smell of your weird flower wall. Mavis giggled. A valiant effort. Arian was quiet. He closed his eyes, ignoring his sight and focusing on his senses. On the feel of the world around him. He felt the vibrant life of the island, the thrumming etherno, the faint life force of the unconscious mages, Mavis's bright, curious energy, the nervous energy of the treasure hunters. And then he felt something else. A faint, lingering ache. A hollow space. He opened his eyes and looked right at Mavis. The loneliness, he said softly. The clearing fell silent. Mavis's bright smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, her big green eyes widening. She saw something in his gaze, a shared understanding that went far beyond the rules of her game. You have been alone on this island for a very long time, haven't you? Arian continued gently. That feeling, it's soaked into the clearing. It doesn't belong in a place so full of life. But since it's a feeling, it's not truly physically here. Yuri and Precht stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. Mavis recovered, her composure returning as a thoughtful, unreadable expression. The ants. I was looking for was the sunlight on the westernmost stone, which is actually a sustained illusion I created this morning to study light refraction, but your answer is also correct. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We shall call it a draw. The truce, brokered by a bizarre game, held. As the sun began to set, they sat around a small, crackling fire Arian had started. The blue skull mages were tied up and left in a grumbling heap at the edge of the clearing. Stories were exchanged. Yuri, Precht, and Ward spoke of their adventures, their hunt for treasure driven by a desire for fame and freedom. Mavis told them of her life on Tenro, of her love for books and learning, and then, her voice growing quiet, of her past. She told them about her hometown, Magnolia, a place she had been forced to flee years ago when Blue Skull had seized control, killing the master of the guild she had belonged to. Then all eyes turned to Arian. What about you? Yuri asked, his earlier hostility replaced by a grudging curiosity. What treasure are you hunting? My brother, Arian said simply, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. The jovial mask dropped for a moment, revealing the decade of loss that lay beneath. His name is Zeref. I lost him a long time ago. I'm going to find him. The name Zeref meant nothing to them, but the conviction in his voice was absolute. An awkward silence fell, heavy with the weight of their respective pasts. It was Mavis who broke it. Magnolia is still under their control, she said, her small fists clenched. The people there are suffering. Arian looked up, his blue eyes meeting her green ones across the fire. The hero in him, the part that was eternally Naruto Uzumaki, responded instantly. He had a home once. He knew what it meant to lose it. Then let's go take it back, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Yuri choked on the piece of roasted fish he was eating. Whoa, hold on. Take back a whole town. From an entire dark guild. There are 4 of us, plus a tiny girl. 5, Arian corrected, grinning. And I think you're underestimating the tiny girl. I'd wager her brain is more dangerous than all of Blue Skull's muscle put together. Mavis beamed at the compliment. My strategies, combined with your generative magic and their combined combat prowess, give us a statistical probability of success greater than 60%. The odds are favorable, you see, Arian said to Yuri. Favorable odds. Yuri looked from Arian's unshakable confidence to Mavis's brilliant, analytical gaze, and then to his companions. Precht gave a slow nod. Ward just shrugged, a goofy smile on his face. A different kind of treasure hunt. A noble cause. It was a crazy, suicidal idea. Yuri grinned. All right, I'm in. But if we pull this off, you're leading us to that jade, fairy girl. Their journey to Magnolia was a blur of sea spray and burgeoning camaraderie. Mavis and Arian became an inseparable pair. They'd spend hours huddled over maps. Mavis explaining complex battle theories while Arian offered unconventional, out-of-the-box suggestions that made her rethink her own flawless logic. He would tell her stories, edited versions, of his past life. Of great ninja wars and powerful tailed beasts, framing them as grand myths. She, in turn, would explain the very fabric of magic in this world, her passion for knowledge infectious. When they arrived at the port town of Harjan to provision before the final leg to Magnolia, the true state of things became clear. Magnolia was a blight on the region. Trade had withered. People spoke of it in hushed, fearful whispers. The guild, Blue Skull, ruled through fear, their master, Jeffrey, a petty tyrant who bled the town dry. By the time their boat docked in the D of night at the neglected canals of Magnolia, Mavis had a plan. It was audacious. It was complex. It was beautiful. We will not engage in a frontal assault, she explained, her small finger tracing lines on a map laid out on the deck of their boat. They were hidden in the shadow of an old warehouse, the oppressive silhouette of the Blue Skull Guild Hall looming in the distance. We will decapitate the snake by removing the fangs. One by one, simultaneously. The plan was a whirlwind of coordinated chaos. Ward would use his green magic to cause a series of diversions on the west side of town, creating massive, impassable walls of roots to block reinforcements. Precht would infiltrate the barracks, using his chains and stealth to neutralize the majority of the guild's fodder while they slept. Yuri would launch a loud, explosive assault on the eastern gate, drawing the attention of the guild's elite fighters. And us? Arian asked Mavis. Mavis's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. You and I, Arian, are going straight for the head. We will infiltrate the guild hall and confront Jeffrey himself. The moment he falls, the guild's morale will shatter. It was a plan built on trust and perfect timing. It was the plan of a mad genius. Arian loved it. The liberation began just before dawn. Ward's magic erupted on the far side of town, the ground shaking as colossal trees burst from the cobblestones. Screams and shouts of confusion followed. Moments later, an explosion of lightning from Yuri lit up the eastern sky. The horn of alarm blared from the guild hall. As panic blew school, mages scrambled from the main doors to respond to the chaos. Arian and Mavis slipped in through a side entrance, hidden by the shadows. The inside of the hall was gaudy and grim, decorated with the spoils of their extortion. They moved like ghosts through the corridors, Mavis guiding them with an uncanny knowledge of the layout she had memorized from old town blueprints. They were almost at the master's chambers when two of the guild's elite, drawn back from the main gate, rounded a corner. Hey, what are you? They didn't finish the sentence. Arian moved, a golden blur. He didn't strike them. He simply placed a palm on each of their chests. A gentle, warm pulse of animus flowed into them. Their eyes rolled back into their heads, and they slumped to the floor, peacefully unconscious. Mavis looked at the sleeping mages. Then back at him. Remarkable. You can incapacitate them without causing any cellular damage. One of my better tricks, Arian whispered back with a wink. They reached the doors to the master's office. Mavis pushed them open. Jeffrey was a large, imposing man with a cruel face, standing over a table with a map of the city. He looked up, his eyes filled with rage. What is the meaning of this incompetence? Who are you? His eyes fell on Mavis, and a flicker of cruel recognition crossed his face. You, the little rat from the Red Lizard Guild. I thought I was rid of you. Your tyrannical occupation of my home has reached its conclusion, Jeffrey, Mavis said, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. Jeffrey threw his head back and laughed, a horrible, grating sound. You and this, boy. You think you can challenge me? He raised his hands, and dark, heavy magic, the texture of oil and shadow, coalesced around him. I will enjoy crushing you myself. He unleashed a torrent of shadow blades. Mavis stood her ground, her hands glowing. She was about to cast an illusion, but Orion was already moving, placing himself in front of her. He thrust his own hands forward, and a solid wall of golden, humming light erupted from his palms, absorbing the shadow blades without a flicker. This is my fight, Orion, Mavis insisted from behind him. I know, he said, not turning around. His eyes fixed on the shocked guild master. But you're the general. Generals don't fight on the front lines. They command the victory. His words struck a chord in her. She was the strategist. He was her decisive weapon. She nodded, understanding her role. He manipulates shadows, but he requires an existing source of light to cast them. His own magic emits none. Plunge the room into darkness, and he will be blind. Orion grinned. Brilliant. He clapped his hands together. It wasn't a spell, it was a signal. He poured his animus not into an attack, but into the very stones of the guild hall. Outside, following the plan, Ward's roots, which had been subtly snaking their way across the city, surged upwards, covering every window of the guild hall, plunging the entire building into absolute pitch-black darkness. What? Jeffrey roared, his shadow magic sputtering. I can't see. But Orion could. His animus allowed him to feel the life force of everything around him. To him, Jeffrey was a raging bonfire in the dark. He moved, his footsteps silent. Jeffrey swung wildly, sending panicked bursts of shadow magic into the empty room. Where are you? Right here, Orion's voice said. Right beside his ear. Jeffrey spun around, but he was too slow. Orion tapped him on the forehead. It wasn't a blow. It was a focused injection of pure animus. It didn't harm Jeffrey. It overloaded him. The dark mage's own magic, fed by an uncontrollable surge of life force, turned on him. The shadows he commanded erupted from his body, not as weapons, but as formless, raging energy he could not control. He screamed as his own power consumed him, leaving him in a smoking, unconscious heap on the floor. As light returned to the room, the sounds of fighting outside had died down. It was over. Later that day, the town of Magnolia celebrated. Its people, free for the first time in years, cheered for the 5 young mages who had liberated them. Yuri, Precht, and Ward were hailed as heroes. But it was the tiny blonde girl and the smiling blonde boy who stood atop the now cleansed guild hall who commanded the most attention. Mavis looked out at the sea of hopeful faces. And a realization dawned on her. This was more than just one victory. This was a beginning. This town, this world, it needs a place for people like us, she said, her voice quiet but carrying over the crowd. A place that feels like a family. A beacon of light against the darkness. She turned to Orion, Yuri, Precht, and Ward, a fire in her eyes. Let's start a guild. Our own guild. Yuri's eyes widened. Start a guild. We will call it. Mavis looked up at the sky, a whimsical smile playing on her lips. Do fairies have tails? Do they even exist? It's an eternal mystery, an eternal adventure. We'll call it Fairy Tale. The name hung in the air for a moment, perfect and full of promise. Yuri burst out laughing, a joyous, booming sound. Fairy Tale. I love it. Orion smiled, a genuine, soul-deep smile. A family, a home. For the first time since that horrible day 10 years ago, the ache in his chest eased. He had people. He had a place. He stood beside Mavis, feeling the warmth of the setting sun and the joy of the crowd. It was in that perfect moment of creation and celebration that the chill fell. It was not the life-draining cold of Zeref's curse. It was a sterile, unnatural absence of warmth. The cheering of the crowd faltered, then died completely. The joyous energy of the moment evaporated, replaced by a quiet, unnerving dread. At the edge of the town square, a figure stood. He had not been there a second ago. He was dressed in simple, flowing white robes, his face placid and serene. His presence felt fundamentally wrong, like a note played in the wrong key. A gear turning against the mechanism. He didn't feel alive, nor did he feel dead. He simply was. His calm, Impossibly ancient eyes swept over the silent crowd, dismissing each person as irrelevant data. Then, his gaze landed on Orion. It stopped, and for the first time, an expression flickered across the serene face. It was not anger or malice. It was the dispassionate look of a craftsman who had just found a flaw in his masterpiece. The man took a silent step forward, his voice echoing not in their ears, but directly in their minds, calm and absolute. The temporal anomaly known as Orion Dragneel. By the authority of the god of time, Chronos, your paradoxical existence must be corrected. You are to be erased. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The unwanted clock hand. The cheer that had been building in the square died in 1,000 throats. The joyous, chaotic energy of liberation vanished, sucked into the vacuum created by the newcomer's presence. He was a still point in a world that had, moments before, been spinning with life. The air grew thin, cold, and tasted of ozone and dust, like the inside of a forgotten hourglass. Orion felt it instantly. It was a pressure not on his body, but on his very existence, a silent, crushing weight that sought to unmake him. His easy-going smile vanished, replaced by a focused, razor-sharp intensity. He stepped forward, placing himself between the serene man and Mavis. His body a living shield. The man, Cassian, registered the protective gesture with a detached flicker of his eyes. Your resistance is noted, the voice echoed in their minds again, unnervingly calm. But it is irrelevant. A paradox cannot be permitted to persist. It unravels the great tapestry. I don't know what you're talking about, Orion said aloud, his voice cutting through the unnatural silence. His words felt small, mundane, against the sheer cosmic wrongness of the being before them. But you're not touching anyone here. Turn around and walk away. Yuri Drayar, never one for patience or threats, was the first to snap. The fear that had gripped the crowd was, for him, a spark on a short fuse. I don't know who you are, pal, but you just walked into the home of the Fairy Tale Guild. You want to talk about erasing people, you'll have to get through me. Lightning, brilliant and crackling with raw power, exploded around Yuri's fist. He lunged forward, a golden thunderbolt aimed squarely at the robed man's chest. Cassian didn't move, he simply raised a hand, his palm open. The bolt of lightning, a spell that could shatter stone, traveled the distance between them. But as it neared his hand, it seemed to age. The brilliant gold faded to a dull yellow, then to a sputtering white, and then, just inches from Cassian's skin, it winked out of existence, dissolving into a puff of static and a faint scent of decay. Its entire lifespan, from creation to dissipation, had occurred in the space of a heartbeat. Yuri skidded to a halt, his face a mask of utter shock. What did you do? Your magic has a beginning and an end, Cassian's voice explained patiently, as if to a child. I merely hastened the journey between the two. Precht acted next, his chains lashing out like metallic serpents. They were ancient artifacts, imbued with powerful magic. As they flew through the air, Cassian made a subtle, twisting gesture with his fingers. The air around the chains shimmered. The gleaming, dark metal of the links flashed brown, then orange, then a deep, flaky red. By the time they reached Cassian, they were no longer chains, but trails of brittle rust that disintegrated into powder upon contact with his robes. My chains, Precht whispered, staring at his now empty hands in horror. From the other side, Ward slammed his hands on the ground. Try this on for size. Nature's wrath. The cobblestones cracked as thick, powerful roots, each as wide as a man, erupted from the earth, surging towards the intruder. They were a testament to the life force of the earth itself. But under Cassian's placid gaze, their charge slowed. The vibrant green of the roots faded to a sickly brown. The wood splintered and dried, bark peeling away as if from a century of decay. They crumbled into mulch and dust before they were halfway to their target. Mavis's eyes were wide, her brilliant mind racing, processing the impossible. He's not nullifying it, she murmured, her voice tight with a mixture of terror and intellectual fascination. He's accelerating time, on a specific, targeted scale. He's making our attacks die of old age before they can land. Yuri, Precht, and Ward stood frozen, their best efforts rendered not just useless, but pitiful. They had been defeated without their opponent taking a single step. The analysis is correct, Cassian's voice confirmed. his gaze never leaving Arian. Your efforts are finite. They are moments. I command the flow of moments. Now, anomaly. Cease your pointless struggle. Your erasure will be painless. Arian looked at his friends. At their shocked and powerless faces. He looked at Mavis, who was analyzing, strategizing, but for the first time, seeing no logical path to victory. He felt a familiar fire ignite in his gut. The same fire that had burned when he faced down Pain, Madara, Kagaya. The stubborn, indomitable will of a boy who refused to be told his existence was an error. You're right about one thing, Arian said. His voice dangerously calm. My friends are finite. Their magic is made of moments. He held up his hand, and a sphere of pure, golden animus, the same one he had struggled to stabilize in the woods so long ago, flared to life. It didn't crackle or burn. It hummed, a constant, steady note of pure creation. But I'm not. He thrust his palm forward. A beam of solid, golden light shot across the square. Cassian raised his hand, expecting the same result. The air around the beam shimmered, the temporal acceleration field locking on. But the light did not fade. It did not wither. It slammed into Cassian's palm with the force of a battering ram. Because it wasn't a moment. It wasn't a projectile with a lifespan. It was a river, and its source was Arian himself. It was pure, self-renewing life force. It existed only in the now. For the first time, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed Cassian's serene face. The impact shoved him back a step, his robes billowing. The golden energy splashed against an unseen barrier, sizzling, refusing to decay. Impossible, the voice in their heads said, for the first time containing a hint of inflection. A power chi does not adhere to the flow of causality. I've always been a bit of a special case, Arian said, pouring more power into the beam. Cassian, realizing he couldn't age the attack, changed tactics. He swept his other hand sideways. The cobblestones directly under Arian's feet suddenly aged a millennium. They cracked, crumbled, and turned to dust, creating a deep pit. But Arian was already moving. His past life's instincts were screaming. He wasn't a mage who stood still and cast spells. He was a ninja. He was a warrior. He cut off the beam and used the forward momentum to leap over the pit, landing lightly on the other side. He didn't stop. He pushed off the balls of his feet, closing the distance in a blur of motion. Cassian's eyes widened slightly. He was a being of concept and power, not a physical combatant. He sped up time around Arian, intending to make him overshoot his target, to make the world a blur he couldn't react to. But Arian's movements weren't based on conscious thought. They were pure muscle memory, honed over a lifetime of war. He adjusted mid-stride, his body flowing like water around the temporal distortions. To Yuri and the others, it looked like Arian was flickering in and out of existence. His movements impossibly fast and jerky. But to Cassian, it was a horrifyingly smooth advance. Arian was upon him. He threw a punch, his fist a simple, physical tool. Cassian tried to erect a temporal barrier, a shield that would age Arian's arm to dust before it made contact. But Arian was clever. At the last second, he coated his fist in a thin, razor-sharp layer of animus. The life energy, immune to the decay, acted as a vanguard. The fist punched through the temporal shield. The sound of the impact was shockingly solid. A sharp crack echoed through the sill, end square as Arian's knuckles connected squarely with Cassian's jaw. The arbiter of Chronos, a being who could command the lifespan of magic itself, was sent stumbling backward, a look of pure, undiluted shock on his face. A thin trickle of silver, mercury-like blood ran from the corner of his mouth. He touched his jaw, his expression no longer serene. It was one of utter disbelief. You struck me, and there's more where that came from, Arian shot back, not giving him a moment to recover. He pressed the attack, a whirlwind of kicks and punches. It was a dance of impossibility. Cassian would slow a kick, only for Arian to use the altered momentum to spin into a different strike. Cassian would create a micro-loop in time, making Arian's punch pass through him, only for Arian to follow Hero with an elbow strike that was already on its way. He was fighting a living opponent, but also the very concept of time, and through pure instinct and the strange, rule-breaking nature of his animus, he was landing blows. Cassian was forced to give ground, his movements growing more desperate. He was not used to this. He corrected cosmic errors from a safe, conceptual distance. This raw, physical, unpredictable violence was a language he didn't speak. He swept his arm in a wide arc. Enough. A wave of temporal distortion washed over the square. Mavis and the others felt a dizzying lurch, as they perceived the next 5 seconds all at once. Arian, caught in the wave, froze, his body locked in a state of temporal stasis. Cassian straightened his robes, his serenity forcibly restored. The bruise forming on his jaw was a stark contradiction. He walked calmly towards the frozen Arian. Your existence is more volatile than the projections suggested. Direct erasure is required. He reached out a hand, his fingertips glowing with a white light that did not age things, but simply unwrote them from existence. Get away from him. Mavis's voice, a raw, desperate scream, shattered the stasis. Behind Cassian, Mavis was glowing with a ferocious amount of magical energy. She wasn't casting a spell he could age. She was creating an illusion. A grand, perfect illusion. The world around Cassian dissolved. He was no longer in Magnolia. He stood on a featureless white plain, stretching to an infinite horizon under a black sun. The absolute order, the perfect stasis, was a reflection of his own master's domain. It was designed to appeal to his core nature, to trap his mind in its flawless logic. The distraction lasted for precisely 1.8 seconds. But it was enough. The temporal stasis holding Arian shattered as he forced his animus to flare outwards, creating a new, now, that overrode Cassian's hold. He didn't hesitate. He poured every ounce of his energy into his right fist. The golden light of his animus so bright it was painful to look at. When Cassian's mind broke free of the illusion, Arian's fist was already buried in his stomach. It wasn't a normal punch. The animus didn't just strike, it invaded. The sterile, timeless being of the Arbiter was suddenly flooded with a torrent of pure, chaotic, uncontrollable life force. It was like pouring water into a complex clockwork mechanism. Gears ground, springs snapped, and the perfect rhythm was shattered. Cassian let out a choked, static-filled cry, the sound of a corrupted data file. His form flickered violently. He shoved Arian away with a final, desperate burst of power, putting 100 feet of distance between them in an instant. He clutched his stomach, his body struggling to expel the vibrant, living energy that was wreaking havoc on his being. His serene mask was gone, replaced by something akin to pain. He looked at Arian, then at the tiny, fiercely determined girl who had created the illusion, and at the other 3 mages who, despite their powerlessness, were standing their ground, ready to die for their friend. Data acquired, the voice in their minds rasped, ragged and strained. The anomaly is not a passive paradox. It is an active infection. It anchors itself through emotional and causal bonds. The methodology must be revised. With that, his body dissolved into a million motes of gray light. Like dust caught in a sunbeam, and vanished. The sterile cold lifted. The oppressive silence was broken by a collective gasp from the townspeople. The sun felt warm again. Arian stood panting in the center of the square, the golden light around his fist slowly fading. The fight was over. For now, Yuri was the first to find his voice. What, in the 7 hells, was that? A messenger, Arian said, his breath evening out. He walked over to Mavis, his expression grim. From someone who doesn't like it when things don't go according to his plan. He looked down at his trembling hands. He had won. He had driven the thing off. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Cassian was just the beginning. He had not just made an enemy. He had declared war on the very concept of destiny. Mavis reached out and, with a courage that stunned the others, placed her small hand on his arm. Her touch was a steady, grounding anchor in the swirling chaos of his thoughts. Your existence is not an error, Arian, she said, her voice soft but absolute. Her green eyes, filled with a fierce, analytical loyalty, met his. It is a variable, and a variable is something that can change the outcome of the entire equation. She gave him a small, determined smile. We will solve this equation together. As a guild, Arian looked at her, at the unwavering belief in her eyes. He looked at Yuri, Precht, and Ward, who were staring at him with a mixture of awe, fear, and a dawning, fierce protectiveness. He had been running for 10 years, searching for his lost brother, alone. Now, he had found something else. A family. And he had just painted a divine target on their backs. He was their greatest strength. And their most terrible weakness. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Emperor's Unwanted Gift. The months that followed the battle with Cassian were a strange and beautiful dream. The terror of that day did not fade, but instead, it was baked into the foundations of their new lives. A dark mortar that held the bright bricks of their camaraderie together. Fairy Tale was no longer just an idea, it was a home, hammered into existence by shared purpose and defiant laughter. The old Blue Skull Guild Hall was gutted, cleansed, and reborn. Walls were knocked down to create a vast, open hall filled with mismatched tables and a long bar that Yuri insisted was the most IAL element of any respectable establishment. Life settled into a rhythm. They took on small jobs. Chasing troublesome Vulcans out of the northern forests, helping farmers reroute a stubborn river, and, in one particularly chaotic instance, retrieving a stolen collection of magical garden gnomes for a wealthy client. Arian, with his overwhelming power and sunny disposition, became the guild's heart. He could end a fight before it began and celebrate the victory louder than anyone. His animus was a tool for everything from reinforcing a collapsing bridge to making sure the flowers in the guild's window boxes were impossibly vibrant. His bond with Mavis deepened into something quiet and profound. They were two sides of the same coin. He was instinct, she was intellect. In the evenings, the rowdiness of the guild hall had settled to a low hum. They would sit atop the roof, the stars spread out above them. He'd tell her edited fables from his past life, stories of shadow clones and nine-tailed foxes. And she would listen with rapt attention. In return, she would unravel the world's secrets for him, explaining the flow of Etherno, the history of the 10 Commandments of Magic, and the theoretical possibility of spells that could bend space and reality. He was her anchor to the present moment, and she was his guide to the vast, complex world he now called home. The shadow of Kronos, however, remained. One night, Arian was ripped from a pleasant dream by a vision so clear and cold it felt real. He stood in a void, before a clock of impossible scale. Its face was a swirling nebula. Its hands were comets of burning gold, and its gears were spinning galaxies. Cassian knelt before a towering throne, upon which sat a being whose form was a constant, shifting paradox, a silhouette of a man carved from the star-flecked blackness of deep space. The anomaly resists erasure, Cassian's voice, now a mere whisper, reported. Its power is anathema to the flow of time. The starry figure did not speak, but a thought of immense, crushing weight pressed down on Arian's consciousness. Observe. The paradox will reveal its own undoing. Every thread, no matter how tangled, has an end. Find it. Arian woke with a gasp. His heart pounding, the image of the cosmic clock seared into his mind. He knew they were being watched, their every move scrutinized by a divine entity waiting for the perfect moment to snip the thread of his existence. The warning came to fruition on a bright, clear afternoon. The guild was in full swing. Yuri was losing an arm-wrestling match to a barrel-chested lumberjack. Ward was trying to coax a sapling to grow into the shape of a chair, and Mavis was trouncing Precht in a game of magical chess. Arian was laughing, leaning back in his chair, basking in the simple, perfect chaos of it all. Then the feeling washed over him. It was a presence that clawed at his very soul. It was not the sterile, conceptual cold of Cassian. This was a suffocating, contradictory aura, a vortex of life and death swirling around a single point. It was the desperate, yearning love of life, and the absolute, indiscriminate power to end it. It was a feeling he had spent 10 years trying to forget and 10 years desperately trying to find. Anxaram's curse. Arian shot to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor. The laughter in the hall died. Every eye turned to him, seeing the blood drain from his face. Arian, what is it? Mavis asked, her voice sharp with concern. He couldn't answer. He could only stare at the guild's open doors, his body trembling with a decade's worth of grief and a sliver of terrifying hope. Outside, the people of Magnolia began to scream. A shadow fell over the town, vast and absolute. The members of Fairy Tale rushed out into the square, looking up at the sky. Descending from the clouds was an airship, a behemoth of obsidian black metal and gleaming gold trim. It was larger than any vessel they had ever seen, bristling with magical cannons and radiating an aura of immense, overwhelming power. On its central sail was a crest they did not recognize, a stylized emblem representing a nation. The Alvarez Empire. The ship hovered silently over the town, a predator contemplating its prey. The citizens of Magnolia, who had just begun to feel safe, scattered in terror. A ramp lowered from the belly of the vessel, and a procession of soldiers marched out. They were clad in immaculate black and gold armor, their movements precise and disciplined. They formed two perfect lines, creating a path from the airship to the center of the square. They were an honor guard. Then, a single figure appeared at the top of the ramp. He was dressed not in armor, but in flowing white and black robes befitting an emperor. His dark hair was the same, but he was no longer the small, terrified boy Arian remembered. This was a man who carried the weight of a century on his shoulders. The curse swirled around him, a visible shimmer of black energy, but it was contained. Controlled. The grass he stepped on did not wither. The air he breathed did not turn stale. He had not conquered his curse, but he had, through sheer force of will, bent it to a semblance of obedience. His dark eyes, filled with an ancient, unending sadness, swept across the town until they landed on the blond young man standing before the guild hall. The world seemed to fall away. The noise, the fear, the soldiers, none of it mattered. It was just two brothers, separated by a decade of time and a chasm of magic, finally looking at each other again. Zeref. He walked down the ramp, his royal guard falling into step behind him. The fairy tale mages instinctively formed a defensive line in front of Arian, their magic flaring. Yuri's lightning crackled, Precht's chains materialized, and Ward's hands glowed with green light. "Stay back," Yuri warned, his voice a low growl. Zeref stopped, his gaze never leaving his brother. He gave a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. The two elite soldiers flanking him, powerful mages whose energy dwarfed anyone in the square save the brothers themselves, immediately halted and bowed their heads. "It's all right." Zeref's voice was quiet, yet it carried across the entire square. It was deeper than Arian remembered, layered with an authority he had never possessed as a child. He took another step forward, alone. "I am not here to fight." Arian's heart was a war drum in his chest. Hope, fear, anger, and a desperate, childish relief battled within him. He took a hesitant step forward, pushing past Yuri's restraining arm. "Zeref." His voice cracked on the name. A smile, the first genuine smile Arian had seen on his brother's face since they were children, touched Zeref's lips. It was a sad, tired thing, but it was real. "Hello, Arian." They met in the center of the tense, silent square. For a moment, they just stood there, 2 feet apart, taking in the years of change. Arian saw the immense power and loneliness in his brother. Zeref saw that the vibrant, life-affirming light in Arian hadn't dimmed, but had grown into a brilliant sun. "I never gave up," Zeref whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I searched for you, for decades. I heard whispers of a boy with golden magic, a power that healed the blighted lands my curse had created. I prayed it was you. Why did you run?" Arian asked, the childish hurt of a decade ago finally bubbling to the surface. "Why did you leave me?" "To protect you." Zeref's composure broke for a second, his voice rising with passion. "That day, I felt the curse latch onto you. I thought it would kill you. I ran so it would follow me, so you would be safe. Every day for the last 100 years, my only regret has been that I didn't get to see you grow up. My only fear was that I had failed. That you had died alone." The raw, desperate love in his voice was undeniable. The anger in Arian's heart began to melt away, replaced by the crushing weight of their shared tragedy. Zeref stepped closer, his eyes tracing the lines of Arian's face. "But you didn't just survive. You thrived. You're so powerful. I'm so proud of you, little brother." He then looked past Arian, at the guild hall, at Mavis and the others who watched with suspicion and fear. His expression shifted, the warmth hardening into something cool and imperial. "I have spent my life building a world for you, Arian," he said. His voice regaining its regal tone. He gestured to the colossal airship, to the disciplined soldiers. "The Alvarez Empire. It spans an entire continent. Its laws are absolute. Its military is unmatched. I have built a world of perfect order, a world without chaos, without mad dragons or foolish wars. I have built a paradise of absolute stability. He looked back at Orion, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. And I built it all for you. Come with me, not as a subject, but as my equal. As an emperor, we will rule together. You will be safe. You will have everything you could ever desire. No harm will ever come to you again. I will control everything, so that you will never have to suffer. The offer hung in the air, grand and horrifying. A gilded cage the size of a planet. Orion looked at the perfect soldiers, at the immense, sterile power of the airship, and he felt a profound sense of revulsion. This wasn't a paradise. It was a prison built by love. He thought of his past life. He remembered fighting for the freedom to choose, for the messy, chaotic, beautiful right to forge your own path. He remembered Naruto's dream, a world of mutual understanding, not of absolute control. Zeref's offer was the antithesis of everything he was, everything he had ever fought for. No, Orion said, his voice quiet but firm. Zeref's smile faltered. No, Orion, you don't understand. This world is cruel and unpredictable. I can protect you from it. I don't want to be protected from life. Zeref, Orion said, his conviction growing stronger with every word. He turned and gestured to his friends. A life without the freedom to choose your own family, to fight your own battles, to feel pain and overcome it, that isn't a life. It's an existence. And I won't live in a cage. No matter how beautiful you make it. He looked at Mavis, and their eyes met. He saw her unwavering support, her belief in him. It solidified his resolve. This is my home now. These are my people. We face the risks together. That's what makes life worth living. Zeref's gaze followed Orion's, landing on Mavis. His eyes narrowed, the sadness within them curdling into a cold, analytical fury. He saw her for what she was. The brilliant, charismatic strategist who had anchored his brother to this flawed, chaotic world. She was the architect of the family that was usurping his own. Her, Zeref said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She is the one who has filled your head with these foolish ideals. Before Orion could react, Mavis stepped forward, her small frame radiating a courage that defied her size. It is not foolish to value freedom, Emperor Zeref, she said, her voice clear and unafraid. Orion's choice is his own. It is a testament to his strength, not a weakness I have instilled in him. We are not his keepers. We are his family. The words, his family, struck Zeref like a physical blow. His face, which had been a mask of pained love, became an impassive, imperial visage. The heartbroken brother was gone, replaced by the Emperor of Alvarez. I see, he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. You have made your choice. And you have chosen poorly. He turned, his robes sweeping around him, and began to walk back toward his airship. Zeref, wait, Orion called out, taking a step after him. Zeref stopped but did not turn around. My offer is rescinded. My goal, however, remains the same. I will save you from this delusion, Orion. I will save you from yourself. His voice grew cold, carrying the weight of an entire empire. I will bring the full might of Alvarez to this continent. I will dismantle the Magic Council. I will dissolve every guild that promotes this chaotic ideology of freedom. I will burn this world down to its foundations and build my paradise for you upon its ashes. And when I am done, when there is nowhere left for you to run, you will come home. The ramp of the airship retracted. The colossal vessel began to rise, its engines a low, menacing hum. Orion stood frozen in the square, the weight of his brother's love now feeling like the most terrible threat in the world. He had fled from a god who wanted to erase him, only to be cornered by a brother who wanted to own him. As the shadow of the airship receded, leaving Magnolia under a suddenly too bright sun, Orion looked at his friends. They were no longer just a small, fledgling guild. They were the heart of a resistance that didn't even exist yet, standing in defiance of the world's greatest military power. And it was all because of him. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The First Fairy War. The silence Zeref left behind was heavier than the shadow his airship had cast. It was a silence filled with the promise of an unstoppable storm. For a full day, the town of Magnolia held its breath. The members of Fairy Tale moved about their newly christened guild hall with a grim purpose, the usual boisterous energy replaced by a low, simmering tension. They were no longer just adventurers. They were soldiers waiting for the first shots of a war they could not possibly win. Orion stood on the guild's roof, the same spot where he and Mavis would talk for hours, and stared east, toward the vast ocean that separated them from the continent-spanning empire of his brother. He felt a suffocating weight of guilt. He had brought this doom upon them. His very existence was a magnet for catastrophe, pulling gods and emperors into the orbit of this small, happy place he had dared to call home. The wooden planks of the roof creaked behind him. He didn't need to turn to know it was Mavis. Her presence was as familiar to him now as his own heartbeat, a bright, inquisitive flicker of energy in the fabric of the world. Blaming yourself is a statistically inefficient use of mental resources, she said, her voice soft. She came to stand beside him, her small form barely reaching his waist. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the same eastern horizon. Is that your tactical analysis, General? Orion asked, a bitter smile touching his lips. It is my observation as your friend, she corrected gently. Zeref would have pursued his path of absolute order regardless. Your presence here has not created this conflict, Orion. It has simply given it a focal point. A cause worth defending. She finally turned to him, her large green eyes clear and unyielding. We are not your burden. We are your guild. We made the choice to stand with you. Do not insult our intelligence by regretting it. Her words were a sharp, clean cut through the fog of his guilt. He looked down at her. At this tiny, impossible girl who faced down cosmic threats and imperial armies with logic and unwavering courage, and felt a surge of warmth that had nothing to do with his own power. It was gratitude. It was admiration. All right, Mavis, he said, his voice regaining its strength. What's the plan? A brilliant, fierce smile lit up her face. The plan is to show the Emperor of Alvarez that a family is a fortress his armies cannot break. They spent the next 48 hours turning Magnolia into a masterpiece of tactical deception. Mavis's mind was a whirlwind of breathtaking ingenuity. Working with Ward, she laid the groundwork. His roots and vines spread beneath the cobblestones, not as weapons, but as a network, a nervous system for the city that she could command. With Yuri, she identified key structural points, places where a targeted burst of lightning could create a temporary, non-lethal barricade. With Precht, she mapped the sewer system and the rooftops, creating a web of hidden pathways for swift, unseen troop movements. Orion's role was different. Mavis had him channel his animus into the very heart of the town square, seeding the earth with a massive reservoir of latent life energy. When the time comes, she had explained, her eyes gleaming with excitement, I want you to be the soul, and Ward to be the hands. He will shape what you create. Their preparations were not a moment too soon. On the morning of the third day, the lookout's horn blared from the cathedral spire. It wasn't a single airship this time. On the horizon was a fleet. Dozens of sleek, black Alvarez warships flanked a vessel even larger and more intimidating than the one Zeref had arrived in. They stopped just beyond the harbor, a silent, steel wall on the water. A single, smaller transport ship detached from the fleet and made its way to the shore. The town was deathly quiet. Every citizen was sheltered, every member of Fairy Tale at their designated post. From his vantage point on the guild roof with Mavis, Orion watched as a lone figure disembarked. He was an old man, surprisingly short, with a long white beard and mustache, clad in regal robes. He carried a simple wooden staff. He looked more like a gentle grandfather than a herald of war. But the sheer magical pressure that rolled off him was suffocating. It was a pressure that did not come from a single type of magic, but from all of them. It felt ancient, deep, and absolute. The old man walked calmly into the empty town square, his staff tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on the stones. He stopped in the center and spoke, his voice gentle but resonating through the entire town as if he stood beside each person. I am August of the Spriggan 12, Shield of His Majesty, Emperor Zeref. I have come on my Emperor's behalf to extend a final offer of peace. Surrender the boy, Orion, to our care. In return, this town and your fledgling guild will be spared the Emperor's wrath. You have 1 hour to comply. The message was delivered not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. This was not a negotiation. It was a final courtesy before an execution. Mavis looked at Orion, a silent question in her eyes. He met her gaze and shook his head. There was no choice. There never had been. Looks like they sent their best, Orion said, his voice grim. An opponent of this magnitude is a variable I could not fully account for, Mavis admitted, her brow furrowed in concentration. His magical signature is plural. It's like listening to an entire orchestra at once. We cannot defeat him in a direct confrontation. So we don't, Orion said, a familiar, defiant grin spreading across his face. We make him wish he'd stayed on the boat. The hour passed. August waited, patient as a mountain. When the cathedral bell tolled, signaling the end of the grace period, he sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. A pity, he said to the empty square. He raised his staff, and Mavis gave the signal. The war began not with a bang, but with a trick of the light. An illusion, cast by Mavis herself, descended upon the town. To August and the Alvarez forces watching from the ships, the city of Magnolia simply vanished. In its place stood a vast, dense, and impenetrable forest, its trees impossibly large, their branches twisting into a thorny canopy. Aboard the flagship, the Alvarez captain stared in disbelief. August, standing at the edge of the phantom forest, merely raised an eyebrow, a flicker of appreciation in his ancient eyes. Clever, he murmured. He took a step forward, into the illusion. For the soldiers who followed him, it was a nightmare. The forest was a disorienting maze. Paths twisted back on themselves. The sun was blotted out. Strange, illusory beasts Ith glowing eyes darted through the undergrowth, their phantom roars echoing from all directions. Then the city fought back. Ward's roots, real and solid, erupted from the illusory ground, ensnaring entire platoons. Yuri, moving like a phantom through the hidden pathways Mavis had designed, would appear from nowhere, unleash a devastating chain lightning attack that arced between the soldiers, metal armor, and then vanish before they could retaliate. Precht was a ghost, his chains silently wrapping around the ankles of rearguard commanders, dragging them into the sewer system below. It was chaos. It was a masterpiece. Mavis, from her perch on the guild roof, was the conductor of this beautiful, violent symphony. She could see it all. The real city, the illusory forest laid over it, the positions of her friends, and the confused, stumbling formations of the enemy. She sent telepathic commands, directing her pieces on the board with flawless precision. Yuri, platoon advancing on your west flank. Intercept. Ward, they are attempting to burn the forest. Flood the illusion on the eastern front. August, however, was unfazed. He walked through the forest, the illusions flickering and dying in his wake. Phantom beasts dissolved into mist as they charged him. The most potent of Yuri's lightning bolts simply grounded itself harmlessly at his feet. He was nullifying their magic, not with a counter spell, but by his very presence. As the Magic King, he understood the fundamental structure of their spells better than they did, and he could simply will them to unravel. He felt a RGE of life magic and turned his gaze towards the center of the town. There you are. He began to walk, no longer at a leisurely pace, but with purpose. He strode through the heart of the chaotic battle, his soldiers still struggling against the guild's guerrilla tactics, but he ignored them. He was the King Peace, and he was going straight for his target. He burst through the final layer of Illis Ion and found himself in the real Magnolia town square. And waiting for him was Orion. You've caused quite a bit of trouble for my men, young man, August said, his tone mild, as if scolding a mischievous grandchild. They were trespassing, Orion replied, his body thrumming with golden animus energy. His Majesty only wishes for your safety. This world of chaos you cling to, it will only bring you pain. He wishes to spare you that. Pain is part of life, Orion shot back. So is freedom. Your emperor doesn't understand that. August sighed again, a deeper, sadder sound this time. He understands it better than anyone. That is why he seeks to control it. You will not be persuaded by words. I see that now. He raised his staff. Very well. I shall retrieve you by force. Do not worry. I will be gentle. He flicked his wrist. The air between them compressed, solidified, and shot forward as a cannonball of pure, invisible force. It was a spell so ancient and powerful it had no name. Orion met it head-on. He didn't erect a shield. He punched it. His fist, glowing with the light of animus, slammed into the force spell. It wasn't a collision, it was a consumption. The spell, a construct of pure etherno, was devoured by the animus, its energy converted and absorbed into Arian's own. He felt a surge of power, like he'd just swallowed a lightning bolt. August's eyes widened for the first time. "You ate my spell. It's a neat trick," Arian said, a savage grin on his face. The fight that followed was a clash of fundamentals. August was a living library of magic. He unleashed a torrent of attacks, pillars of holy fire, lances of absolute zero ice, blades of wind that could slice through steel. He was a master of every element, every school, every theory of magic that had ever been conceived. And Arian countered it all. He didn't nullify it, he didn't block it, he unmade it. The fire was extinguished not by water, but by a wave of life that robbed it of its heat. The ice was not melted, but simply reverted to its base state of inert water molecules. The wind was calmed by an opposing pressure of pure, generative force. August was throwing every tool of destruction he had at his disposal. And Arian was meeting it with the single, overwhelming tool of creation. "What is this magic?" August demanded, his calm facade finally cracking under the strain of unleashing so much power to no effect. "It defies all magical law. It cannot be copied. It cannot be nullified. It has no structure, no formula. It's not magic," Arian yelled back, his body glowing like a star. "It's me." He knew he couldn't win a battle of attrition. August's magical reserves were seemingly infinite. He needed to follow Mavis's plan. He slammed his hands on the ground, channeling his will into the reservoir of animus he had planted earlier. Warred. Now, all across the city, the battle stopped. Warred, his face beaded with sweat, felt the surge of Arian's power connect with his own. He roared, thrusting his hands into the earth. The city of Magnolia came alive. The cobblestones of the square erupted upwards, not as jagged shards, but as shaped, interlocking plates. Houses bent and reformed. Clock towers became arms. Cathedral spires became legs. Fueled by Arian's limitless animus and shaped by Ward's masterful control over nature, the entire center of the city rose up, forming a colossal golem of wood, stone, and sheer stubborn will. The fairy tale guild hall sat upon its shoulders, a makeshift head, with Mavis and Arian standing atop it like pilots. The city golem, a creature, born of a tactician mind and a paradox's soul, took a thunderous step, its shadow falling over the stunned August. For the first time in centuries, August, the Magic King, felt a genuine sense of awe. And a sliver of fear. He could not unravel this. It was too big, too complex, its power source too alien. He unleashed his full power, a cataclysmic beam of pure magical energy, at the golem's chest. The golem roared, a sound of grinding stone and splintering wood, as it raised its massive arms and met the beam with a cross-arm block. The impact was titanic. A shockwave leveled what was left of the illusory forest and sent a tidal wave rolling back through the harbor, swamping the first line of Alvarez warships. The golem was pushed back, its stone arms cracking and glowing cherry red from the heat, but it held. Inside it, Arian was pouring every ounce of his being into its form, his animus regenerating the damage as quickly as August could inflict it. August poured more power into his attack, the raw energy distorting the very air around him. But he knew, with dawning horror, that this was a stalemate. He could fight this golem for days, and as long as the boy Arian fueled it, it would not fall. He could level the rest of the continent, but this one, single spot, animated by this impossible power, would resist him. The cost of capturing one boy would be an entire army and a fleet. He cut off the beam. The silence that fell was deafening. The golem lowered its smoking arms, standing tall and defiant. August looked up at the boy standing atop the creature of stone and life, and he understood. Zeref's love had not built a cage for his brother. It had forged a warrior. He slowly lowered his staff. Enough. The single word was a surrender. Not of the war, but of this battle. He turned and began to walk back towards the transport ship, his back straight, his dignity intact, but the message was clear. The city golem slowly, carefully, began to disassemble, its parts returning to their places. The houses and streets settling back into the shape of a city. It was battered, scarred, but whole. As August boarded his ship, he looked back one last time at Arian. His voice was not broadcast this time. It was a simple, quiet statement carried on the wind. You were stronger than he knew. And you are more foolish than he could have ever imagined. The Alvarez fleet turned and sailed away, leaving a bruised and exhausted, but victorious, Magnolia behind them. That night, the guild hall was a wreck, but it was filled with the sounds of exhausted, triumphant celebration. They had done the impossible. They had faced the might of the Alvarez Empire and sent it packing. Arian, however, was not celebrating. He was on the roof again, his body aching, his energy reserves almost completely dry. He looked out over the damaged city, the cost of their victory laid bare. Mavis joined him, her own face etched with fatigue. They stood in silence for a long time, the sounds of the party below a distant murmur. "We won," she said softly. "We did," he replied, his voice hoarse. "But he'll be back. Zeref won't give up. This was just the beginning." "I know." He finally turned to look at her, the moonlight catching the lines of exhaustion on her face. He saw the weight she carried, the burden of command, the lives that rested on the brilliance of her mind. And he saw the unshakable faith she had placed in him, her ultimate weapon. Without thinking, he reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of blonde hair from her face. His fingers lingered for a moment on her cheek. It was a small, simple gesture, but it felt more significant than the titanic battle they had just fought. A current passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged in the crucible of war. It was no longer just friendship or intellectual respect. It was deeper. It was a partnership, absolute and unbreakable. "Thank you, Mavis," he whispered. "For everything." She leaned into his touch for a fraction of a second, her large green eyes holding his. A small, tired, but genuine smile graced her lips. "Get some rest, Arian. The next battle plan is already forming in my head. And it's going to be a masterpiece." Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Oracle's Poisoned Chalice. The scars on Magnolia were healing. In the weeks following the battle, a wave of defiant optimism swept through the town. The citizens, having witnessed the impossible, now looked upon the members of Fairy Tale not just as their saviors, but as their own. The guild hall, once a symbol of oppression, was now the heart of the community. Its doors always open. New recruits, drawn by the tales of the city that became a golem, arrived daily, a motley collection of dreamers, outcasts, and brawlers, all looking for a place to belong. For Arian, it was a time of quiet revelation. The gnawing loneliness that had been his constant companion for a decade was gone, replaced by the steady, chaotic warmth of a family. His days were filled with the simple joys he had been denied, sparring with Yuri, helping Ward in his increasingly ambitious gardening projects, and losing spectacularly to Prek'tai. Endgames of strategy that involved far too many rules. His evenings belonged to Mavis. They would sit on the rebuilt roof, the sounds of the celebration below a pleasant hum, and simply be. The charged moment after the battle with August had changed something between them, shifting their easy camaraderie into a deeper, unspoken understanding. He found himself mesmerized by the way her mind worked, the way her eyes would light up as she connected disparate pieces of lore into a grand, cohesive theory. She, in turn, seemed to find a quiet fascination in his simple, straightforward view of the world. She saw the universe as a complex equation to be solved. He saw it as a home to be protected. They were in perfect, complementary opposition. "It's illogical," she said one evening, looking out at the town twinkling below them. The joy, the rebuilding, based on the threat posed by Alvarez, a logical response would be mass evacuation and the fortification of a more defensible position. "Since when have people ever been logical?" Arian replied, leaning back on his hands. "They're not staying because it makes sense. They're staying because it's their home. They have something to fight for. It's the most powerful magic there is." Mavis was quiet for a moment, processing his words. "The magic of the heart," she mused. A concept often dismissed in strategic texts as an unquantifiable variable. Perhaps they are wrong. She looked at him, a small, genuine smile on her lips. "Perhaps you are right." While Magnolia rebuilt, a different kind of construction was taking place hundreds of miles away in Era. The pristine white city that housed the Magic Council. Within the hallowed halls of the council chambers, a new voice had recently captivated the 9 council members. It belonged to a being who called itself the Oracle of Kronos, a figure who had appeared from obscurity, claiming to be a humble servant of the god of time, gifted with the ability to perceive the tangled threads of causality. The oracle, Nemos, was a master of appearances. To the council, it took the form of a wizened old woman, her face a roadmap of peaceful centuries, her voice a soothing balm of ancient wisdom. It spoke of balance, of order, and of the sacred duty of the council to prune the branches of fate that might grow to choke the future. Chairman Crawford Seam, a man whose fear of chaos far outweighed his faith in freedom, was utterly enthralled. The oracle's words validated his deepest anxieties. The world was too messy, too unpredictable. Mages like the Dragneel brothers were an affront to the stable, orderly world he so desperately sought to maintain. The victory at Magnolia was not a triumph, the oracle croaked during a private session with the chairman and a few of his most trusted colleagues. It was a symptom of a greater disease. The power of Zeref, the Anksarum curse, takes life. It is a power of absolute ending. We have now witnessed the emergence of its antithesis, the power of Orion, the Animus. It is a power of absolute beginning. He saved his city, another council member argued weakly. He fought off the Alvarez Empire. A sapling is a harmless thing, the oracle countered, its voice soft and poisonous. But what happens when that sapling is fed by an infinite wellspring? What happens when its growth cannot be stopped? Nemos raised its gnarled hands. The air in the chamber shimmered, and a vision coalesced above the grand central table. It was a vision of the future, a possible future, rendered in horrifyingly vivid detail. It showed Orion, his face a mask of unimaginable grief, kneeling over the still form of Mavis Vermillion. It showed the golden animus energy erupting from him, not as a controlled beam or a warm glow, but as an uncontrolled, world-consuming tsunami of life. They watched, horrified, as Magnolia was the first to be swallowed. But this was not destruction. It was a grotesque, hyper-accelerated creation. Cobblestones split as titanic, pulsating flowers. Their petals the size of houses, burst from the ground. Buildings were encased in seconds by rapidly growing wood, their structures groaning and collapsing under the strain, becoming little more than skeletons for a new, monstrous form of forest. The vision expanded, a god's eye view of the continent. The tidal wave of life spread outwards from Magnolia, a beautiful, terrifying cancer. Mountains were choked by vines as thick as towers. Rivers were dammed by colossal, fast-growing coral-like structures. Cities were consumed, their people not killed, but encased in amber-like sap or trapped within living, breathing prisons of wood and flesh like fungi. The world was being drowned, not in water or fire, but in a tide of uncontrolled, monstrous life, beautiful and utterly unlivable. The vision ended, leaving the council members pale and trembling. The kernel of truth within the lie was what made it so potent. They had seen what Orion could do. They had heard the tales of the city golem. It was not a great leap to imagine that power, untethered by grief, turning into this world-ending plague. The Anksarum curse creates a world of the dead, the oracle whispered into the stunned silence. The Animus, unchecked, creates a world where there is no room left for anything to live. They are two sides of the same apocalyptic coin. Two brothers, destined to destroy the world, each in their own way. Quote, the debate was short. The fear was absolute. The motion was past. Fairy tale. The guild that had stood against an empire, was to be branded a dark guild. The IR actions were recontextualized not as heroism, but as a reckless display of a power too dangerous to exist. And a warrant was issued for the arrest and neutralization of the anomaly, Orion Dragneel. To lead this mission, they needed more than just soldiers. They needed a symbol, a hero, and Chairman Seam knew just the man. Lord Commander Valerius was the paragon of the Magic Council's ideals. His family had been wiped out decades ago by a stray wave of Zeref's curse, and he had dedicated his life to ensuring such a tragedy would never happen again. He was the master of judgment magic, a lost art that allowed him to manifest light in the form of divine weapons, their power directly proportional to his own conviction in the righteousness of his cause. He was a good man, utterly incorruptible, and therefore, perfectly suited to be a pawn. The oracle showed him a personalized version of the vision. It showed Orion not just losing control, but choosing it. It showed him laughing maniacally as his power consumed the world. A mirror image of the brother who had destroyed Valerius's life. It is a heavy burden, Chairman Seam said, placing a hand on the Lord Commander's shoulder. But why? Oh, you were the only one with the strength and the moral clarity to bear it. You are not an executioner, Valerius. You are a surgeon, removing a tumor before it can kill the patient. Valerius, his heart heavy but his resolve absolute, accepted. He would lead the newly formed task force, the Oracle's Shield. It would be composed of the most elite, most loyal mages from a dozen different legal guilds, a holy army marching to save the world from a hero they no longer understood. The news broke like a thunderclap across Ishgar. Magical lacrima screens in every major city lit up with the stern face of Chairman Seam. He announced the council's decree, painting a grim picture of the threat posed by Arians, unstable and world-altering power. He declared Fairy Tail a dark guild, accomplices to this potential apocalypse. Their victory over Alvarez a reckless act that had revealed their true danger. In the Fairy Tail Guild Hall, a stunned silence fell as they watched the broadcast. The cheers of celebration died in their throats. Dark Guild, Yuri snarled, his fist crackling with lightning. After everything we did, they're calling us the criminals. It's a political move, Precht analyzed, his voice cold. Alvarez is a foreign threat. The council cannot be seen as weak. By branding us the primary danger, they regain control of the narrative. They're afraid, Arian said quietly, his eyes fixed on the screen. He wasn't looking at the chairman. He was looking at the still image of Lord Commander Valerius that flashed on screen, the man's eyes burning with a righteous fury. They're afraid of what they can't control. And they'll destroy it rather than try to understand it. The door to the guild hall burst open. It was the mayor of Magnolia, his face ashen. They're here, he stammered. On the outskirts of town. An army, flying the council's banner. Arian walked to the door and looked out. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the square. At the end of the main road, a column of knights stood. Their armor gleaming silver and white in the dying light. At their head was Lord Commander Valerius, mounted on a white warhorse, a spear of pure, solidified light held in his hand. They weren't an invading army. They were an army of crusaders. The townspeople, who had been celebrating with the guild members just moments before, now peered from their windows, their faces filled with fear and confusion. Their heroes were now wanted criminals. The world had been turned upside down. Arian walked out into the square, alone. Mavis, Yuri, and the others followed, forming a line behind him, a silent, defiant wall. Valerius dismounted and walked forward, his armored boots clicking on the cobblestones. He stopped 20 feet from Arian, his gaze unwavering. He was not a man who enjoyed this. He was a man performing a sacred, terrible duty. Arian Dragneel, his voice boomed, imbued with the power of his magic. It was a voice that commanded respect, a voice of judgment. By the authority of the Magic Council of Ishgar, you are declared a Class S threat to the stability of the continent. Surrender yourself to the custody of the Oracle's Shield. If you comply, your guild members will be shown leniency. Quote, on what grounds? Mavis challenged, stepping forward, her small voice cutting through the Lord Commander's powerful aura. We defended this town. We broke no laws. Valerius's gaze softened for a moment as he looked at her, but his resolve did not waver. Your very existence is a violation, child. The power he wields is a seed of destruction. We have seen the future it will reap. I am here to prevent that apocalypse, not to punish past heroism. The future isn't written yet, Arian said, his voice level. You can't condemn someone for a crime they may commit in a future you've only seen in a vision. Can't I? Valerius shot back, his conviction flaring. If you saw a man holding a lit match to a barrel of gunpowder, would you wait for the explosion before you acted? I see a power within you that could burn the world, and I will not stand by and wait for the ash to fall. It was a clash of absolutes. Arian's belief in freedom and choice Agai. NST Valerius's belief in order and preventative justice. There was no room for compromise. I'm not going with you, Arian said, his voice dropping, the animus beginning to swirl around his hands in a gentle, golden vortex. And you're not taking me. Lord Commander Valerius raised his spear of light, its tip glowing with a brilliant, blinding intensity. I had hoped you would be reasonable. I see now that the Oracle was right. The anomaly must be contained by force. Behind him, the Knights of the Oracle's Shield raised their own weapons. Behind Arian, Fairy Tail's mages braced themselves, their own magic flaring to life. The square, which had twice been a battlefield, was now the stage for a different kind of war, not of nations, but of ideals, fought by men who both believed themselves to be the heroes of the story. The setting sun painted the scene in hues of blood and gold, the final moment of peace before the world they knew was torn apart again. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Sea of Lost Souls. The setting sun cast the world in shades of orange and blood. Lord Commander Valerius stood as a figure of righteous judgment, his spear of light a beacon of the Magic Council's absolute conviction. Before him, Orion and the nascent fairy tale guild stood as a line of defiant silhouettes. There was no room for negotiation, no path to de-escalation. There was only the quiet, terrible moment before the storm broke. For the good of the world, Valerius declared, his voice a sorrowful thunder, I will pass judgment. He thrust his spear forward. It did not fly. Instead, a beam of pure, searing light, as wide as the guild hall doors, shot across the square. It was not an attack meant to incapacitate, it was a judgment meant to obliterate. Orion met it. He didn't try to absorb it or deflect it. He simply pushed back. A torrent of golden animus, raw and untamed, erupted from his hands, meeting the holy light in the center of the square. The two forces, one of divine, unyielding law and the other of chaotic, indomitable life, crashed together in a blinding conflagration. The ground cracked. Windows for a mile around shattered from the sheer pressure. The air itself screamed, as it was torn apart by the two warring energies. It was a stalemate, a perfect, terrifying balance. But it was a stalemate Orion could not afford to hold. He was a single point of defense. Valerius had an army. Now, Mavis's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the roaring din, a telepathic command sent to every member of the guild. The plan, formulated in the scant seconds of the standoff, was not to win. It was to run. Yuri Drayar, a wild grin on his face, slammed his fists together. Lightning dragons roar. A massive bolt of lightning didn't strike at the knights, but at the cathedral bell tower behind them. The ancient stone exploded, sending a shower of debris, not at the soldiers, but into the space between them, a chaotic, impassable curtain of falling rock and dust that broke their formation. Simultaneously, Ward slapped the ground, his magic surging. Colossal, interwoven walls of wood and thorny vines erupted from the earth, not to attack, but to contain. They formed a twisting, serpentine corridor, a temporary tunnel that led from the town square straight towards the southern canals. It was Precht who created the final piece of the diversion. His enchanted chains shot high into the air, snaking around the rooftops. He pulled, and dozens of pre-prepared barrels of flour and brightly colored dyes, confiscated, from the market, tipped over, creating a massive, choking, and utterly disorienting cloud of multicolored powder that filled the air, refracting the light of the setting sun into a blinding, psychedelic haze. The entire sequence took 3 seconds. Orion let out a final, guttural roar and poured a massive, final burst of animus into the beam, forcing Valerius back a single, crucial step. He then cut the connection and spun around, grabbing Mavis Aru. ND the waist and leaping into the wooden tunnel Ward had created. Fairy tale, move out, he yelled. They ran. They were no longer heroes defending their home. They were fugitives, branded criminals. By the very world they sought to protect. They fled through the makeshift tunnel, the sounds of the Oracle's shield regrouping behind them a thunderous roar. They burst out at the edge of the canals, where a small, sturdy-looking fishing vessel, the Stargazer, was waiting, its engine already rumbling. It was a boat Yuri had won in a card game weeks ago, a forgotten prize that had just become their salvation. They scrambled aboard, and with a final, explosive burst of lightning from Yuri to sever the mooring ropes, the small ship surged away from the docks and into the darkening waters. They led back to see Lord Commander Valerius standing on the shore, his form glowing with rage, the city of Magnolia spread out behind him, safe but no longer theirs. The home they had fought for was now the cage they had escaped. For 2 days, they sailed south, into the uncharted waters of Ishgar's lower quadrant. They were adrift, a tiny island of defiance on an endless sea, hunted by both the world's largest empire and its most powerful governing body. The mood on the ship was grim. Mavis, however, had not been idle. While the others manned the ship, she was sequestered in the small captain's cabin. Surrounded by books and maps she had frantically grabbed before their escape. They were ancient texts from the Tenro Island Library, works most considered mythology. On the evening of the second day, she emerged. Her eyes bright with a feverish, intellectual fire. She unrolled a large, brittle map on the deck, its surface covered in archaic script and drawings of impossible sea creatures. "I have a destination," she announced, her voice cutting through the despair. Everyone gathered around. Kronos, the god of time. His agent, Cassian, could manipulate causality. Valerius and the conch, ill are being manipulated by an oracle who can see the future. Standard magical and military solutions are useless against an enemy who can control the rules of the game. "So what do we do, Mavis?" Ward asked, his usual goofy demeanor gone, replaced by a weary anxiety. "We find a way to play outside the board," she replied. Her small finger tapped a location on the map, a swirling vortex of ink in the middle of a vast, empty ocean. The ancients called it the Kronos anomaly, or the Sea of Lost Souls. It is a place where time does not flow correctly. It is a wound in the world, a sea where moments, instead of passing, simply collect, like driftwood. Legends say it's where things that have been erased from the timeline go to die. "Sounds like a lovely place for a holiday," Yuri muttered dryly. "It is dangerous," Mavis conceded, "but the texts speak of an object that is said to be its heart. An artifact that exists in a permanent state of now, completely immune to the flow of time. They called it the Core Kronos, the heart of time. Here," she pointed to the script, "it is called the Sunken Heart." Arian's head snapped up. An object immune to time. A weapon that a time god could not age to dust. A shield that could not be outmaneuvered by prophecies of the future. "If we can find this sunken heart," Mavis concluded, her gaze intense, "we may have a weapon against Kronos. We may have a way to prove the Council's visions are a lie." "It is a desperate, illogical gamble." "I like it," Arian said, a spark of his old fire returning. "It's better than just running. Let's go steal a god's blind spot." Their new course was set. The journey took them into a part of the ocean that sailors actively avoided, a place where the stars themselves seemed to warp and twist in the sky. The sea turned from blue to a strange, silvery, placid gray, and a thick, cloying mist rose from its surface, swallowing them whole. Compasses spun wildly. The sun and moon became indistinct, pale smudges behind the eternal twilight of the fog. They had entered the Sea of Lost Souls. It was a realm of profound melancholy. The air was filled with whispers, fragments of conversations from moments that no longer existed. Shapes loomed in the mist and then vanished. The crumbling spire of a castle from a forgotten kingdom, a petrified tree from an age before humanity, the ghostly prow of a ship that had been sunk 1,000 years ago. It was a graveyard of moments. To navigate it, Mavis realized, was impossible by normal means. "The path isn't spatial," she murmured, staring into the swirling fog. "It's causal. We need to find the strongest echo, the deepest wound." Arian closed his eyes, reaching out not with his senses, but with his animus. He could feel it. The entire sea was a void, a place of endings. But there was a thread, a single, faint line of something else. It felt like a memory, a powerful, lingering regret that acted as a lighthouse in the gloom. "That way," he said, pointing. As they sailed deeper, the sea's nature became more aggressive. It wasn't just a place of melancholy, it was a place of confrontation. The mist began to coalesce, drawing on the deepest regrets of those who traveled through it. For Arian, a soul who had lived 2 lives and carried the losses of both, the sea found a feast. The first figures to step from the mist onto the deck of the Stargazer were his parents. Not as they had died, but as he remembered them from that final, perfect afternoon. His mother smiled, her hand outstretched. His father stood beside her, his expression warm and proud. "You've grown so strong, Arian," his mother's voice whispered, a perfect echo in his mind. "But you were alone," his father's voice added, laced with a familiar sadness. "Where is your brother? You were supposed to look after each other." Arian froze, his breath catching in his throat. Yuri and the others saw only shifting shapes of mist, but Arian saw them clear as day. "They're not real," Mavis said urgently, grabbing his arm. Her touch was a warm, solid anchor. "It's the sea. It's feeding on your memories, creating psychic remnants." But knowing it didn't make it easier. He had to walk past his smiling parents. their expressions turning to ones of sorrowful disappointment as he refused to acknowledge them. They dissolved back into the mist as he passed, their final, whispered question hanging in the air. Why did you let him go? The next specter was Neji Hyuga. He stood with his arms crossed, his Byakugan activated, his expression as stern and judgmental as it had been on the day of the Chunin exams so long ago. So this is the new life you were given, the ghost of Neji said, his voice cold. A gift paid for with my own. And what have you done with it? You have failed another brother. You have allowed your family to be hunted. The destiny of failure seems to follow you, Naruto Uzumaki. Shut up, Arian growled, his fists clenching. The specter blurred forward, his movements impossibly fast. 8 trigrams 64 palms. Arian reacted on pure instinct. The graceful, precise strikes of the gentle fist were met by his own raw, powerful taijutsu. He blocked and parried, the specter's blows feeling chillingly solid. It wasn't just an illusion, it was his own guilt and memory given tangible, combative form. He had to fight the embodiment of his own failure. He finally broke through the spectral assault, his fist wreathed in animus, and landed a solid blow that dissipated the ghost of Neji into a cloud of mist. He stood panting, the old wounds of a past life torn open and raw. But the worst was yet to come. A large, white-haired man in a green coat and a horned forehead protector materialized at the prow of the ship, a sad, familiar smile on his face. Jiraiya. Well, look at you, Kit. The specter of the pervy sage said, his voice a perfect, painful memory. You got tall, but you're still the same knucklehead I remember. His smile faded. I believed in you. I believed you were the child of prophecy, the one who would bring peace to the world. And you did, but at what cost? And now this. Another world, another war you've started. Is this your destiny? To be a catalyst for chaos wherever you go? That's not what I am, Arian said, his voice trembling. Isn't it? Jiraiya's specter countered, his form beginning to swell, taking on the shape of a massive toad. Show me what my student has become. The spectral sage mode Jiraiya attacked, and Arian couldn't bring himself to fight back with his full strength. He dodged the massive Rasengan, he parried the blows. But every move was a torment. This was his master, his grandfather in all but blood. To fight him felt like the ultimate betrayal. The battle raged across the small ship, threatening to tear it apart. Until finally, Mavis's voice cut through his grief. He is not real, Arian. He is your pain. You cannot save him. You can only move past him. You have to fight for us, for the now. Her words, a plea from the life he had now, broke the spell. He looked at Mavis, at Yuri, Precht, and Ward, who were desperately trying to keep the ship from being swamped by the bottle's fallout. This was real. They were real. He faced the ghost of his master, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, Sensei. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were filled with a terrible resolve. He met the next attack head-on, his own power flaring, and finally, mercifully, unmade the ghost of the man he had loved. He collapsed to his knees on the deck, emotionally and spiritually spent. The whispers of the sea faded. The mists seemed to part, as if in acknowledgement of his victory. Mavis rushed to his side, kneeling in front of him. Arian. He looked up at her, his defenses shattered. The walls between his two lives crumbled into dust. You were right, he whispered, his voice hoarse. They're my pain, my past. There's so much you don't know about me, Mavis. That night, as the stargazer drifted in the now calm heart of the misty sea, he told her everything. He told her of the village hidden in the leaves, of being a Jinchuriki, of Team 7, of his Nindo, his way of the ninja. He told her of Akatsuki, of pain, of the fourth great ninja war and the fight against a goddess from the stars. He told her of his final battle, of dying, and of waking up as a child named Arian. With the ghost of his past life as a constant companion. He laid his soul bare, expecting shock, disbelief, perhaps even fear. Instead, Mavis listened with a quiet, intense focus. Her brilliant green eyes never leaving his. She didn't see an anomaly or a paradox. She saw a boy who had carried the weight of two worlds, who had lost more than anyone she had ever met, and who still, impossibly, chose to fight for others. When he was done, a heavy silence fell between them. He couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze, the shame and pain of his confession too raw. Then, he felt her small hand cover his. He looked up. There was no judgment in her eyes. Only a deep, profound understanding and an empathy that went beyond words. 2 lives, she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet awe. And you've chosen to be a hero in both of them. She squeezed his hand. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Orion. We'll carry it with you. In that moment, in the heart of a sea of lost souls, their bond was forged into something unbreakable. It was no longer admiration or partnership. It was love, a deep, quiet, absolute love built on the shared wreckage of their pasts and the defiant hope for their future. It was then that they saw it. Ahead of them, the mist cleared completely, revealing a small, crystalline island. At its center, floating just above a pedestal of black, unreflective rock, was a pulsating crystal. It was the size of a human heart, and it glowed with a soft, internal light that was not a color, but a concept, the pure, unwavering essence of the present moment. The sunken heart. They docked the ship and walked onto the crystalline shore. The air here was clean, pure, free of the sea's sorrowful whispers. Orion felt its pull, a resonance with his own animus. This was it, their weapon, their hope. He stepped forward, his hand outstretched, every instinct telling him this was right. Mavis stood just behind him, a hand on his shoulder, a silent, supportive presence. The moment his fingertips brushed against the surface of the sunken heart, his world exploded. His physical body vanished. He was adrift again, but not in the sea. He was in the star-dusted void from his dream, standing before the cosmic clock. The throne was no longer empty. The being of shifting starlight, Kronos, was there, his presence an absolute, crushing weight. Orion felt like a single grain of sand trying to comprehend a hurricane. So, the paradox finds the blind spot, a voice that was not a voice, but the very concept of time itself, echoed through him. A futile effort. You seek to fight destiny with a broken cog from my machine. Orion stood his ground, the connection to Mavis through her hand on his shoulder in the real world a faint, distant anchor. My destiny is my own to write. He projected back with all his will. Is it? Kronos asked, a cold, divine amusement in the thought. You believe your power is a tool for life. For freedom. I will show you its truth. I will show you the future you are so desperate to forge. The void shattered. Orion was back in Magnolia, but it was wrong. The sky was black with smoke. A battle, more terrible than any he had ever seen, raged through the streets. He saw the Spriggan 12 fighting alongside the members of Fairy Tale against an army of beings made of pure light, the full might of the Oracle's shield. In the center of it all, he saw himself, fighting back to back with Mavis. Then it happened. A stray beam of white-hot judgment magic, fired by a desperate Lord Commander Valerius, missed its mark. Ion watched in horrifying slow motion as it shot past him, straight towards Mavis. She turned, her eyes wide, no time to cast an illusion, no time to move. The beam struck her in the chest. The world went silent. He saw her fall, a single, perfect tear tracing a path through the soot on her cheek, her lips forming his name without a sound. A scream of pure, undiluted agony tore itself from his soul. And with it, the animus erupted. It was not the controlled, golden light of a hero. It was a sun-going supernova. A tidal wave of raw, unrestrained life, born of absolute grief, exploded outwards. Exactly as it had in the Oracle's vision. He saw Magnolia consumed, his friends crying out as they were encased in the monstrous, beautiful growth. He felt his own consciousness being swallowed by a grief so total that his only instinct was to make everything grow, to force life into the world so violently that death could never claim anything from him ever again. He saw the truth. The Oracle's vision wasn't a lie. It was a prophecy, a self-fulfilling one. He was back in the void, on his knees before the throne of Kronos, the horrifying vision seared into his soul. This is your end, the god of time declared, his voice a final, absolute judgment. This is the inevitable result of your paradox. You are not a hero. You are a trigger, and the woman you love, she is the one who will pull it. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The god's spiteful move. The return to his body was a violent, jarring impact. Orion gasped, stumbling back from the sunken heart, his hand flying to his chest as if to physical. Lee held his own fracturing soul together. The vision, so vivid and absolute, was burned onto the inside of his eyelids. Mavis falling. The world drowning in his grief. Arian. Mavis's voice was sharp, pulling him from the brink. Her hands gripped his arms, her touch the only real thing in a world that had just been shattered. What happened? What did you see? He stared at her, his eyes wide with a terror she had never seen in him before. Not when facing the dragon, not when facing Cassian, not even when facing August. This was a terror that came from within. He couldn't speak. He couldn't tell her that her death was the key to the world's destruction, that their love was the very catalyst Kronos was waiting for. To say it would be to make it real. He took a ragged breath, forcing his voice to work. Kronos, he rasped, his eyes darting around the crystalline island as if the god himself might be lurking in the reflections. He showed me a future. A trap. He reached out and, with a trembling hand, took the sunken heart from its pedestal. It was warm, humming with a steady, constant rhythm, a perfect counterpoint to the frantic, panic beat of his own. Holding it felt like holding an anchor in a hurricane. It didn't erase the vision, but it solidified his place in the present, a shield against the crushing weight of a predetermined future. Yuri, Precht, and Ward came rushing onto the island. Having seen the blinding flash of light from the ship. What the hell was that? Yuri demanded, his hand crackling with nervous energy. It felt like the whole world shook. We have what we came for, Arian said. His voice clipped and strained. He couldn't look at them. He couldn't look at Mavis. We need to leave, now. His fear was a palpable thing, a contagion that silenced any further questions. Their escape from the sea of lost souls was a tense, hurried affair. The melancholy whispers and ghostly apparitions were gone, but Arian felt 1,000 unseen eyes watching their every move. The prophecy was no longer just a threat, it was a script, and he felt like Kronos was simply waiting for all the actors to take their places. Meanwhile, in a different fold of reality, within a grand, sterile palace in the heart of the Alvarez Empire, Zeref stood before a map of Ishgar. The pieces were in motion. His fleets were blockading the major ports. His armies were massing on the western shores. His Spriggan 12 were ready. He had expected a swift, decisive campaign to crush the Magic Council and bring his brother home. Yet, the reports from August had given him pause. Arian's power was greater than he had anticipated. His will was stronger, and his bonds with this fairy tale were problematic. His love for his brother was a pure, absolute thing, but the Anksarum curse had twisted it over the centuries into something possessive, something that equated safety with absolute control. Arian's defiance was not, in Zeref's mind, a sign of strength. It was a symptom of a sickness, an infection of chaotic idealism caught from Mavis Vermillion and her band of strays. It was into this troubled rumination that a new presence entered the throne room. Zeref did not startle. His senses, honed by a lifetime of being surrounded by the aura of death, had felt the shift in reality an instant before it occurred. A being of pure concept simply was where a moment before it was not. Zeref turned. Before him stood the silhouette of a man carved from the night sky, the starry form of Kronos himself. The air in the room grew cold and still, not with the energy of death, but with the utter absence of time's passage. Emperor Zeref Dragneel, the voice of Kronos echoed, not as a sound, but as an ancient, undeniable thought. The Black Wizard, the Cursed One. Zeref's eyes narrowed. His own power, the curse given to him by a lesser god of life and death, bristled in the presence of this far more ancient and fundamental entity. I do not know you, Zeref said, his voice a low threat. But you are not welcome in my empire. I am Kronos, the god replied, the thought laced with an utter lack of concern for Zeref's authority. And I am here because we share a mutual problem. The anomaly. Your brother, Arian. The mention of Arian's name sharpened Zeref's focus. My brother is my concern, not yours. He is a paradox that unravels my creation, Kronos stated. He is a delusion that prevents you from achieving your goal. He refuses your sanctuary. He resists my correction. And the reason for both is the same, the bonds he has forged. Specifically, the bond he shares with the strategist, Mavis Vermillion. A flicker of cold fury passed through Zeref's eyes. He had come to the same conclusion. You wish to protect him, Kronos continued, his voice a seductive, cosmic whisper. I wish to preserve order. Our goals, for the moment, align. You have spent centuries trying to control your curse, a gift from a petulant godling. You have managed to contain it, but you cannot command it. I can offer you what you desire most. The starry silhouette of Kronos raised a hand. A single, shimmering thread of golden light, a strand of pure causality, detached from his form and floated towards Zeref. I offer you mastery, the power to wield your curse not as an indiscriminate plague, but as a focused weapon. The power to create and command demons from its energies. The power to finally bring about the end you so desperately crave, to create a world so perfectly ordered that your brother will have no choice but to accept your protection. Zeref stared at the thread of power. He knew, with every fiber of his being, that this was a devil's bargain. To accept power from such a being would be to enslave himself to its cause. But the offer, mastery over the curse that had ruined his life. The power to finally achieve his goal, it was the one temptation he could not resist. His love for Orion was an obsession so profound it eclipsed all reason. And what is your price? Zeref thought, his voice a low growl in the silent conversation. A simple service, Kronos replied. Help me capture your brother. Your curse, once mastered, is the one power in this world his animus cannot simply unmake. Death cannot be undone by life if that death is wielded with absolute intent. Bring him to the island at the heart of the Sea of Lost Souls. His new friends believe they have found a weapon there. Instead, they will find only his cage. Once he is mine to correct, I will be out of your affairs. You will have your power, and you can build the perfect, silent world your heart desires. The god was lying. Zeref knew it. He knew Kronos had no intention of letting him keep Orion. But the god was also offering him the one thing he couldn't refuse, the power to overcome his brother's new family. He would take the power, secure his brother, and then deal with the god. It was a foolish, arrogant plan, but Zeref's love had long ago burned away his caution. He reached out and let the shimmering thread of causality sink into his hand. Power, cold and absolute, surged through him. The chaotic, swirling aura of the Anksarum curse snapped into focus, becoming as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. He could feel it, a tool now, ready to be wielded. He will be delivered, Zeref said, his voice no longer just that of an emperor, but of something far more terrible. Simultaneously, in the Grand Cathedral of Era, the oracle of Kronos appeared before Lord Commander Valerius. The righteous knight had been frustrated. His quarry had escaped, and the trail had gone cold. Be at peace, my lord. The oracle's soothing voice whispered. The anomaly has been located. A vision appeared before Valerius. It showed the stargazer sailing away from a crystalline island. He saw Orion on the deck, clutching the sunken heart, his face pale and grim. He has acquired an artifact of great power, the oracle explained, weaving a new tapestry of lies. He intends to use it to amplify his own magic, to bring about the destructive future we have foreseen. He is no longer just a potential threat. He is an active one. The oracle then bestowed its own gift. A sliver of pure temporal energy. A shard of Kronos' own divine power, flowed from the oracle's hand and into the Lord Commander's spear of light. The spear flared with a white-hot intensity, its form shifting, becoming more intricate. More divine. The god of time grants you his blessing, champion, the oracle declared. You are no longer just a commander of men. You are his angel of time. Your judgment will be swift. Your justice, absolute. Go to the island. End this threat, before it can unmake us all. Valerius felt the surge of divine power. His conviction, already absolute, was now amplified 1,000-fold. The moral grayness of his mission was burned away, replaced by the stark white light of a holy crusade. He was no longer just a man doing his duty. He was the chosen hand of a god. The stargazer was a ship of ghosts. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a tense, fearful silence. Orion was withdrawn, distant. He would spend hours staring at the sunken heart, the vision of Mavis' death playing over and over in his mind. Every smile she gave him, every time her hand brushed his, it was like a knife twisting in his gut. His love for her, the thing that had become his greatest strength, now felt like a death sentence. They were sailing for a small, deserted island chain south of Magnolia, a place Mavis had identified as a potential hideout. But they all knew it was a temporary solution. They were a single boat against two world powers and a god. They were 3 days out from the Sea of Lost Souls when the sky darkened. It was not a storm. The clouds were a sickly, swirling black, and from them descended the Alvarez Empire's flagship, Zeref's personal vessel, flanked by 2 of the Spriggan 12's ships. At the same time, from the east, a fleet of Magic Council warships appeared. Their white sails pristine against the dark horizon. At the head of the fleet was a single, gleaming vessel, and on its prow stood Lord Commander Valerius, his spear glowing with a pow that made the very air around it warp. They were caught, pinned between the hammer of an empire and the anvil of a holy army. They found us, Ward breathed, his face pale. How? Yuri snarled. No one could have tracked us here. Arian looked from the Imperial fleet to the Council's warships, then down at the sunken heart in his hands. It had been a beacon. A trap. The entire quest had been a lie. A carefully orchestrated move by Kronos to bring all the pieces to this exact spot on the board. From the deck of the Alvarez flagship, Zeref appeared. He was not wearing his Imperial robes, the simple black tunic he wore when he studied. The aura of the curse around him was gone, replaced by a focused, terrifying calm. He looked directly at Arian, a deep, profound sadness in his eyes. It's over, Arian. His voice carried across the water, clear and calm. Come with me. I can end all of this. I can protect you from them. I can protect you from yourself. From the other side, Lord Commander Valerius raised his divine spear. Demon, your time is at an end. Surrender the artifact and face your judgment. A massive 3-way battle erupted on the open sea. Alvarez ships fired cannons that launched spells of pure destructive force. The Council's ships retaliated with runes that created massive whirlpools and waterspouts. In the center of the chaos, on the deck of the tiny Stargazer, Fairy Tale prepared for the inevitable. Mavis, Ward, Precht, you handle the fodder. Arian commanded, his voice shaking but resolute. Yuri, you're with me. Zeref descended from his ship, not flying, but walking on a solid path of black, death-infused magic. He landed on the water as if it were solid ground and began to walk towards them. From the other side, Valerius, now wreathed in a blinding white aura, leapt from his ship, his blessed power allowing him to skate across the surface of the waves. Arian met them halfway, Yuri at his side. The sea erupted around them as the 3 forces collided. Yuri engaged Valerius, a storm of golden lightning against an angel of holy judgment. Their battle was a chaotic explosion of light and sound. Arian faced his brother. Why, Zeref? Arian pleaded, his hands glowing with animus. Why are you helping him? I am not helping him, Zeref replied, his voice a low, pained whisper. I am helping you. I have mastered the curse, Arian. I can control it. I can finally create the world we were meant to have. But first, I have to remove the distractions. He raised a hand, and the black magic coalesced, not into a wave of death, but into the shape of a horned, monstrous demon. They have poisoned your mind. Mavis, the guild, they must be removed. The demon lunged. Arian met it with a roar of defiance, his animus clashing with the focused energy of the curse. It was a battle of brothers, a battle of philosophies, a battle of creation versus a controlled, purposeful end. The fight was a blur of gold and black. Arian was stronger, his animus a raw, boundless force. But Zeref was more precise, his every move backed by centuries of pain and a will that had been honed to a razor's edge by God's gift. Amidst the chaos of the larger battle, Mavis was on the deck of the Stargazer, her mind a whirlwind of strategy, directing Precht and Ward, countering the maneuvers of 2 separate fleets. She saw an opening, a moment when one of the Council ships was exposed. But she also saw something else. Lord Commander Valerius, his power amplified by Kronos, was pushing Yuri back. He broke through Yuri's defenses and unleashed a beam of pure judgment, not at Yuri, but aimed directly at the Stargazer's mast, intending to cripple the ship. But his target was off. The beam was angled slightly lower. It was going to hit the deck, right where Arian was locked in a desperate struggle with one of Zeref's demons. Mavis saw it all in a horrifying instant of perfect clarity. The beam. Arian, his back turned, completely unaware. The vision Kronos had shown him. Her death. The world's end. There was no time for a plan. No time for a warning. There was only time for a choice. She ran. She moved faster than she ever had in her life, her small legs pumping. Her mind screaming, she pushed Korean with all her might, shoving him out of the beam's path. He stumbled, turning, his eyes widening in confusion, then dawning horror as he saw place herself where he had been standing. The beam of white-hot judgment struck her squarely in the chest. The world went silent. The roar of the battle, the clash of magic, the screaming of the sea, it all vanished. There was only the image of Mavis, her body illuminated by the terrible light, a look of serene, sad acceptance on her face. She smiled at him, a final, heartbreaking smile, and then she collapsed to the deck. The vision. It was coming true. Chapter 8 End.